Welcome, everyone, to the Wenham Board of Selectmen, a regularly scheduled meeting of February 6th. As we like to begin every meeting, we'd like to invite anyone in the audience here who like to speak to an item that's not on the agenda. There's a crowd? No, there's not a crowd. Seeing none, we'll go right into the agenda. The first item is the Wenham Town elections. By the way, I want everyone to know how hard your selectmen are working. I'm going to show the thickness of this book. I think based on the thickness of this, we should reevaluate the selectmen's,
Pay.
pay.
Yeah, totally. By the page.
That'll go over big.
Calories we use just carrying the damn thing.
That's a good thing. I need a bigger bag for that.
Excuse me. All right. I think we have a dearth of applicants this year, but nevertheless, we have one 3-year term on the Board of Assessors, one 3-year term on the Board of Health, one 3-year term on the Board of Selectmen, 2 3-year terms on the Wenham Library Board of Trustees at large, 2 3-year terms on the Hamilton Wenham Regional School Committee. Has anyone taken up papers on that? You know?
Not sure.
They have, as of yesterday morning, nobody had taken papers out.
My God, it used to be highly contested races. And one 1-year term of moderator, one 5-year term on the planning board, one 3-year term on the planning board, that's 2 terms in that, one 3-year term on the water commission, one 5-year term on the housing authority. Last day to pick up papers, to submit papers is, last day to submit papers back to the clerk is February 22nd. Nomination regional school committee seats are available from the school district office on Friday, January 12th, and require 40 signatures from registered voters from Hamilton and Wenham. There are 2 3-year terms in the regional school committee. Last day to submit papers back to the school administration is Monday, February 26th. Other notices, the annual town luncheon is Saturday, April 7th at noon at the Buca School, as always. The annual town meeting is April 7th at 1 p.m. at the Buca School, as always. And the annual town election is Thursday, April 12th, between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. here at Town Hall. Let's see if there's page 2 here. Nope, no page 2.
Jack, if I could just add one more detail to that.
Another election we missed?
Nope, just relaying information from the clerk's office that there are 2 seats besides the school committee where the incumbents aren't running and nobody's pulled papers yet. So the 1 3-year term for the Board of Assessors and the 1 5-year term for the Planning Board. Just to
Which one? Okay.
get that out there.
Okay. Okay. Okay, the next we have the cookie exchange, a very heavy-duty item here.
I'm going to read this one
This is a
verbatim.
No, wait a minute, John, hold
I'm
it. This
gonna
is
read it
Catherine. Catherine has a cookie exchange.
I have
Yes.
cookies. Yeah, so it's a
It
Valentine's.
was a highly contested thing I
I know,
done with Peter.
I know. If you want to swap, we can, but I kind of like cookies. So there's a Valentine's Day cookie exchange at the Wenham Council on Aging for the most delicious party of the year, as our notice says. Please bring 3 dozen cookies, homemade or store-bought, on February 14th at 2 o'clock to the Council on Aging. RSVP 978-468-5529. Bring an empty container to take home your goodies. So this is a cookie exchange. I read that and missed it. Everyone brings their cookies and then everybody takes home an assortment of the cookies that are there.
You got it.
Is this the first year for the cookie exchange?
I believe it's the first annual, maybe.
First year.
I don't think I've ever seen or heard of it
Why
before.
you have to bring 3 dozen. I was thinking 3 dozen.
I think they'd let you in with 2 dozen, you know?
Yeah, I think it's nice. I might go. Then I don't have to
And bring a
bake.
container so you can bring
I
some
can
home.
bake just 3 dozen and then have an assortment, which is,
Panera Bread. Go to Panera Bread. Pick it up there.
okay.
All right.
John, you're on for the 375th.
All right, the 375th Anniversary Committee for the town is sponsoring a writing contest for Wenham residents. Suggested topics: what do you like about living in Wenham? A story about life in Wenham, fiction or nonfiction. A story about the person or family who lived in Wenham 375 years ago.
Wow, that's a toughie.
Where's
Where would you
Albie Dodge when you need
You have
him?
to do some research.
We'd have to go to the Wenham Museum, I think, and look up, Hiram somebody or other.
Submissions for these stories are due by Monday, February 26th, so you just have a few more weeks. All participants will be invited to present their work at the literary evening on Wednesday, March 14th, where the winners will be announced and awarded a 375th T-shirt gift. Certificates, local business.
I'm going to go to that.
Yeah, so,
You gonna write something?
I want to hear about the person who lived 375 years ago.
so get your writing gear out and do up a story.
And the fictional ones, too. I can't wait to hear that one,
The
too.
literary evening is here in Town Hall? Did I miss
It
that?
is? Okay,
Oh, TBD, okay.
there we go.
Oh, okay. All right, so
So get writing.
write them up. See what our kids learn in schools, our schools.
No.
I'll set you.
All right, we have, good.
A report. Before we get into the budget, I just want to mention very briefly that the Recreation Department's now accepting applications for next summer. Looking both for gate attendants and lifeguards for the pool, and counselors in the summer camp. And registration for both of those programs are also up and running now on the Recreation Department's website, which is hwrecreation.com. And turning to the budget, obviously we'll be meeting with the schools in Hamilton tomorrow night, but just to give a status update at this point, Finance and Advisory Committee's been meeting with the department heads over the past few weeks. Some minor adjustments have been made along the way, but no major policy changes at this point.
Just fact information. The meeting's tomorrow night at what time and where?
7 o'clock at the Bucher School.
Thank you.
And so at this point, town expenses are set to increase by 2% exactly from FY18 to 19. So based on where the schools are and their budget process at this point, it looks very likely that we'll have an operating override for next year. And just to give a high-level summary of where the schools are based on their last meeting, essentially the superintendent's proposed budget, which included that $400,000 in critical priorities,
Which is an
remains-
increase over the last announced critical priorities. It was like 350-ish, right?
So it was
356-ish?
no. It's always been that those critical priorities is $400,000
Okay.
is what was included. So that at that amount, the school's budget was projected to increase by a little over 4.8%. Based on the last school committee meeting, they're now intending to cut user fees by 50% in FY19, which is an increase of another, well, it's actually a decrease of $177,000 in revenues. So what that translates to is a net operating expense increase of 5.4% now. So based on a 2% increase on the town side, really all that the town can accommodate within our levy limit is a 2.5% operating expense increase. So the additional 2.9% school increase is what the operating override will be. It translates to about $365,000 over the levy limit at this point. So, you know, in order to come to deliver a budget within the levy limit, the schools would have to cut essentially $1 million, just over $1 million out of their operating budget for next year, because we pay 35% of the assessment is our assessment rate.
So I have two questions, Peter. One, are they going to be making a presentation tomorrow night?
Yeah.
Yeah, PowerPoint, some kind of a PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a slide deck handout. I think that is my understanding.
Do you think numbers will be as you just described?
I don't anticipate them to be any different. I met with the superintendent and assistant superintendent yesterday, and those figures are based on that conversation and the most recent school committee meeting.
My second question is, when do they get to vote the final
They plan to vote that next Tuesday night,
February
on
13th.
February 13th. And also, for informational purposes, that both Hamilton Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee plan to structure their budget warrant articles for town meeting similarly to Wenham's. They have plenty of levy capacity. They don't need an operating override. But essentially, they're planning on separating out the school budget increase above 2.5% as a separate warrant article, similar to what we've discussed here.
Okay. Do you think that those decisions we haven't actually made it yet, but there's Hamilton, do you think that was going to come up tomorrow night as well?
I would expect it to, yeah. I know that I got an email from Michael Lombardo this morning informing me that that was the intention of the Hamilton Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee.
I meant, do you think the regional school committee is going to bring this up tomorrow?
Based on the agenda, we have discussion on the operating override on that agenda, so I would expect it to be discussed.
Comments?
No, I don't think, there's no point to the meeting really, unless we talk
Yep.
about where they are and how it fits in our budget. We may have to bring it up, but they're going to have to speak to it, I think.
Well, last I heard, which is a while ago, that our attorney opined on what the prerogatives were of each Board of Selectmen of each town, and the lawyer for the regional school district disagreed. I don't know if that's going to, that type of a back and forth is going to emanate or not.
So based on the conversation I had yesterday, I think the superintendent, assistant superintendent at that school committee meeting, their last school committee meeting, wanted some clarity in terms of what exactly the town's plan was for how to structure the warrant articles. And I think now that they are clear that we intend to, when you look at both articles combined, give town meeting voters the opportunity to vote on the school budget, and it will be presented by the superintendent as such, that there aren't any issues. There weren't any concerns on their end, as long as it's presented that way.
Okay.
Yeah. And just the one other piece, obviously, at our last meeting, we talked a little bit about the turf field project. At this point, there are still 2 debt exclusions planned to be forwarded by the school committee for next year, but it's the still $1 million placeholder number for the Winthrop sprinkler and fire alarm system, but they have taken the turf field project off the table and have replaced it with $2.6 million debt exclusion for a number of smaller projects, 20-plus smaller projects that are all kind of under the umbrella of safety, accessibility, and capital infrastructure. And it sounds like they intend to move forward with that, bring that debt exclusion to town meeting for next year. But the turf field project is put out at least until next year, if not sometime beyond.
And this potpourri of debt exclusions is, I think you sent us an email on that, but refresh my memory again, was it 2 million, 2.2 and change?
2.6
Yeah.
for the safety accessibility projects, and then separate from that, $1 million or thereabouts for the Winthrop sprinkler.
So it's still 3.6 million.
It's 3.6, but before it was 3.6 just for the fields plus another $1 million for the Winthrop sprinkler. So it's, and they had in their original budget presentation in January talked about looking to fund the 2.6 in FY20, which is when the middle school debt falls off.
Mm-hmm.
So they pulled that into this town meeting. That 2.6 that is at this town meeting was originally on their list for next year.
For 20, and now it's for 19.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And we do for our, Leslie and I planned a very short presentation on the Wenham side of things for tomorrow night, but we do plan on showing, based on our levy limit budget, operating override, and the debt exclusions, the estimated impacts to the tax rate, because I think it's important to have that discussion at this point in the process.
Yep.
Anything else?
Yep.
Okay, moving on, John. Marijuana.
All right, Jack, you asked the wrong guy to handle this one. Because,
No, I got the right guy.
No, you got the wrong guy.
By reputation, Joe. Yes, I did. I think so.
Reputation. All right. I'll go out back to the building. I don't know what more I could add to the conversation regarding this whole issue that our attorneys haven't covered. And then they close by saying it all could change very quickly or over the next so many months. So, Peter, if you've got some better way of encapsulating it to the broader audience out here.
Sure. So
I mean, there's only 100 pages in here on it, so.
let me pull out some of them.
Only 5 worth reading.
So to your point, Lauren was here at the last meeting, and the presentation was probably about an hour long, start to finish.
At least.
And essentially, at this point, we have a number of decisions to make. It's going, starting in April, the state is, the Cannabis Control Commission is going to allow for licensed adult use recreational marijuana facilities. And so many towns are considering some form of zoning to regulate those uses. So because we are a no community, the vote was 53%, 47. If we were inclined to propose a ban to town meeting could approve it without it going to the ballot. And so based on the fact that we are a no community, our options are that we could propose a zoning bylaw that would ban all adult use recreational uses. That's a 2/3 vote, as with any zoning bylaw change. I think based on conversations at the last meeting and town council's advice, it might make sense to do a general bylaw ban as well, belt and suspenders. Obviously, it's a lower threshold for a general bylaw ban. It's only majority vote. So if the zoning ban were to fail, then we would move forward with a general bylaw ban. And I think because it sounds like it's a little unclear whether a general bylaw ban will stand up with the Attorney General. If the zoning bylaw ban fails, regardless of what happens with the general bylaw, then I think we need to have a zoning bylaw that restricts, a restrictive zoning bylaw that would set out what kind of uses would be allowed and where they would be allowed. So if you look at the zoning map in the packet, we obviously have a very small business district. We don't have an overlay. We don't really have any other options in town for where we would put it. So if we would have to put it somewhere, I presume we would put it in the business district, which is essentially just on Main Street downtown and then on the Hamilton line. There are, if you turn to...
While you're looking at that, I do have 2 comments that I would make.
Yep.
One is if we, you will be seeing this on our town warrant, for our on the warrant for our town meeting. So it will be presented to you. 2, which is every bit as important, is that we want to protect our destiny, our own destiny. Masters of our own destiny. So without the knowledge of what you would be voting on, or the voters will be voting on, whoever's there, the control could move strongly in our hands, correct? Versus.
Yeah, I mean,
So
if we do nothing, if we don't move forward with any warrant articles, then hypothetically, we could have no, we could have no say in one of these facilities coming into.
So regardless of your
use.
opinion on it, your personal opinion on it, you want to control your destiny, you need to know what is going on and then so first be educated, and then secondly, be there and vote your conscience.
So the planning board obviously has to hold a public hearing on any zoning bylaw, new zoning bylaw or zoning bylaw change. I know they're planning to meet later this week on Thursday and have this on their agenda for initial discussion. If you look at I think the 5th and 6th slide from Lauren's presentation at our last meeting, there's a list now of different types of licensed marijuana establishments. Includes cultivation, retailer, manufacturer, lab, distribution, microbusiness, social consumption, transportation. My sense is, based on our business district, is that anything beyond just brick and mortar retail, if we were going to allow any uses, that would seem to be the one that would be most in keeping, you know, if a ban were to fail, and we were required to allow one use. It feels like that's the only one that really would make sense.
Thank you.
And so, I guess the final piece is that if, because there's a potential for a ban to fail, both zoning in general, and we would then have to put in some restrictive zoning bylaw, then there's the local option that would allow us to recoup 3% of the receipts through a local tax. And that's another warrant article that we would potentially put on there, if that were the case.
So, come town meeting, or the warrant hearing first, and then town meeting secondly, how can we expeditiously educate the town at the town meeting without Lauren taking up an hour and 15 minutes of this, because, you know, we're going to lose people. Can she truncate this down to like 10 minutes?
Probably not 10, but certainly
11, 12. Well, I mean, we can't go on for an hour, because
Right.
she gets, you know, she was very, very good.
Right.
But, you know, I mean, this, you get inundated with options here, and then she correctly says, well, you know, the legislature's done this, we don't know what the Marijuana Control Commission, whatever it's called, is going to do this. There's so many unknowns that
there's very little unknown left in terms of
the regulations have not been promulgated, right?
correct, but that doesn't necessarily wouldn't impact whether we're going to ban or restrict it, because we don't have a lot of policy decisions to make relative to where a facility would be sited, right? We don't have
Let me try
industrial
again.
parks.
Can we get this down to like a dozen PowerPoint slides?
You know, Jack, once we get to town meeting, I think, we will have already limited the options.
Yes.
So she will not have to talk about the, 4,000.
But explaining our rationale for limiting the options is still going to require a little dialogue.
A little bit, but I mean, I think a lot of the background she gave us is going to become,
People could ask questions, all night long, all afternoon long. I'm just looking to see if we can, for the average person attending the meeting, who's familiar with the controversy over this, can we just come up with like 10 to 12 PowerPoint slides that last no more than 15 minutes to educate both the warrant hearing participants and town meeting? And because, we can't have this thing go on at 6 o'clock at night. It's going to be a challenge to do that.
So is the board generally supportive of the concept of not really taking a particular policy position, but saying, here are our options, or not?
well, I guess I have an opinion on that. I think based on the fact that we're a no community, and based on the fact that all of the surrounding communities have either put a ban or a moratorium in place, my position would be, our recommendation would be a ban. If that were to fail,
You still have the other.
then we would need to have a backup option, which to me would be not a ban and allowing of a retail use in the most restrictive way we possibly could.
Yep.
So I don't know what that all means, But I think that's what I would that's what I would recommend. And so I don't think we're just giving people a bunch of options. I think we're saying these are the options that your Board of Selectmen, based on whatever, are recommending. And you can, if you don't want a ban, vote no, and then here's the,
No, I think it's something in between. I'm saying, here are the options, and here's what the Board of Selectmen recommend.
the options can come in the presentation.
Yes.
But the warrants are gonna end up being based on our recommendations,
yes.
right?
I think you're both saying the same
Yeah,
thing.
I
Yeah.
think that's right.
But so it's those 4 warrant articles. It's a zoning bylaw ban, it's a general bylaw ban, then it's some kind of restrictive zoning bylaw, and then the local option for if we do end up having to allow it and somebody were to open up a store, that we would get
Right, some revenue from.
the revenue back.
I think that's right.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. As long as we, within a limited period of time, say, we could do this, this, and this, and this, the Board of Selectmen recommend this.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Okay.
I do have a question, though. There is a restriction, a buffer zone, I think, if we were to have any kind of a retail establishment. And I think it's 500 feet from a school or someplace where children would gather. I'm not getting the wording exactly right.
Yep.
Is a church a place with a nursery, a place that children would gather? I'm thinking about, I don't know if it's 500 feet from First
Yeah,
Church to our business district.
I know that,
And you may not have an answer, but that's just
no, but
something.
I know Lauren touched on it, and that is something, I believe, that is actually in the Cannabis Control Commission's draft regulations.
Okay. So that would be the only sort of red herring for me, anyway, in terms of if we had a bylaw, a warrant with a bylaw allowing the use, we'd have to, and we're saying it's in this business district, we'd have to be sure it could be in this
Right.
business district.
Yeah, because you can't make the bylaw so restrictive that it can't be zoned anywhere.
Right.
The 97, supermarket, the 97 could qualify that as well.
Is that a business district?
No,
No. It's a residential district with a business that's been given an exception to have a business.
it's grandfathered use.
So the other
So
business
if they
district
change
is,
uses, then,
it'll change.
Yeah.
But it's down by like 300 Main and
Correct.
Henderson's. That's the other
Yep.
place where we have a zoned business district.
correct.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, I think we got it. Now it's just up to Peter and Lauren to write the articles.
So I think you got the idea. I think
Whoever.
that, we want to present all the, to my point a few minutes ago, the regulations are still draft by this commission. You mentioned draft, so they could change. Anyway, we're talking about the
We just
school.
covered a couple of the warrant items, so we don't need to talk about those anymore.
Good job, John. I knew you.
I'm
Yeah,
pulling for
it's
you,
going to be
Jack.
messy, but whatever. We'll do our best we can. But it's, that, and I think there's going to be, we have to presume there's going to be people who feel strongly about this, one way or the other, and they're going to get up, and we're going to have a line, at the microphone, and that we're going to have a line on the microphone.
A more difficult job this year than she had last year.
Yeah.
I think the one thing, and it was in Lauren's first couple of slides the last time, and it's in the letter from EOPS, from the state public safety, outlines it as well, is that there are still, personal use of recreational marijuana is still going to be permitted. This is not impacting that at all. And there's a couple slides of all the things that are still permitted that any ban would not impact. And I think that's going to be important to get
To
across.
Jack's point, that's part of the information, I think.
Right. People can walk around, and
Yeah.
as long as it's not in a no-smoking district, if we have such a thing. and
Or in
that,
public anywhere, right?
No,
They can't.
you can smoke in public, can't you? Then you can smoke marijuana in public, right?
Mhm.
In your car.
It's just public places.
Public, yeah.
So, Chief, how are you going to distinguish between somebody who is a DUI and somebody who is flying high as a kite
We have begun
on marijuana, that is?
We've begun specialty training in that. There is some science going on where they're actually trying to develop a breathalyzer that would distinguish between the two. That's probably a little ways off and probably even further off to be accepted by the court as these things take time. But there are adjustments in place that are already being used as far as field sobriety testing and such.
That's going to be a challenge.
It is.
Okay, thank you. All righty, I guess that's enough of that one.
It gives you enough to
Yep.
move forward, right?
Okay,
And like I said, the planning board will be having their initial discussion
Thursday.
later this week, and then we'll hold a hearing.
is that going to be televised,
later
that meeting?
in February. I don't know, I'll have to check.
I think it'd be
Probably
helpful
not.
if it was televised.
Yeah, the discussion and the hearing.
Yeah.
You know,
All righty. Next, Catherine, warrant
yeah.
articles.
So, here's, go ahead.
Can I just ask one thing?
No.
Alex Bacon is here
Oh, yeah.
to make his report on the FY17
Oh.
audit. And
Oh.
before we get into the
We should
39 potential warrant articles, I thought it might be nice to invite
Yes,
him
I
up.
promised him we'd do that, but I didn't see him sitting in front of that
Let him sit.
rather big fireman right there, so that,
Down all right time?
Yeah, sure, Alex.
There you go. You got center stage.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't recognize you. You were hiding back there.
No, thank you. Okay, well, this won't be as long as 39 articles anyway,
That's good to hear.
unless you want it to be. So,
Oh, but
shall I
you got
just?
almost as many pages.
Yeah, that's true, or twice that even. I have only a select few here. So I'll get started then.
Please.
Thank you. So in December, Jim Powers and Tom Kudo of accounting firm Powers and Sullivan, Sullivan and Powers LLC, presented to the audit committee. This was on December 20th. And so Rich Jones and the audit committee and I were present, as were Leslie and Chris from our finance department. And Jack, of course, I know you had a conflict, and hence this update this evening. So Jim Powers reviewed with us the summary findings of the FY17 audit of Wenham's financials, which were completed in September. I understand that there might have been a slight delay in the completion this year owing to the obvious staffing changes in the finance department. So getting them up to speed and working closely with Powers and Sullivan, as well as some new software that was beginning to be used in July. And I think some changes, some ever-present changes to the government accounting standards that we're kind of getting up to speed on. So the purpose of the audit, of course, is to state whether Wenham's financial statements are prepared in a manner consistent with government accounting standards, and whether or not the auditors are seeking to find out if there could be material misstatements, or if financial misstatements rather could exist in our documents. These could result from either a lack of internal controls or potential non-compliance with laws or contracts and so forth. And it's important to note that the scope of the audit, as you may recall from prior audits, is based on the controls that we already have in place. So they're not really looking to comment on that which we're doing if it's sufficient, although they will point out deficiencies, but really just a matter of, given our process, is this resulting in, are the numbers correct based on the process we have in place. So ultimately, Powers and Sullivan found that Wenham's financial statements for FY17 are in good order with no indications of deficiencies or material weaknesses in internal controls. There was one indication for, one recommended course of action for improvement, and this is new for the FY17 audit, and that relates to fraud prevention, identification of potential fraud areas, and bolstering internal controls to help prevent fraud going forward. And I have the sense that this is probably commonplace for the auditors now to be, with so many opportunities for financial fraud, just as we're aware of identity theft and everything else, electronic use of accounting statements and the like, and just keeping everything safe and secure and limit fraud risk of various sorts. So while any prior year notifications in the management discussion analysis have been addressed, that's one net new. And Leslie and Chris are working on implementing new controls to help prevent fraud risk in the current fiscal year.
Question?
Yes.
You kind of slided over that, in my opinion. If it's that relevant or prevalent, how come this hasn't been addressed prior? And why haven't we taken the initiative to look into this more? heavily, and how would we, as he's recommending, have an in-house, I'm not sure I would agree with the in-house part, self-audit to see that fraud prevention is taking place. I mean, what do we know about fraud? I mean, that's a huge topic in today's world. I mean, it comes in from every crack and crevice now.
Yeah, no, I mean.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure, fair question. I think the focus on fraud in particular is, it's a blanket term and it's very general. And I think
Yep.
not being an expert on all of our internal controls or the audit process, not being a CPA, my sense is that a lot of that which our finance department is doing today as part of their day-to-day policy and procedure in maintenance of, preparation of the financial statements, essentially constitutes in many ways fraud prevention through the controls that are in place to a degree, but it's not specifically called out as such. And so, well-kept finances by their nature and the controls in place would help prevent, limit, for example, access by someone unauthorized to these accounts or portfolios or to make transactions. Someone like myself who isn't granted authority. So I think the long-standing procedures that are in place do help to limit fraud by their very nature. It's just the current focus on let's get a dedicated program in place that we can call out a number of procedures. Yeah.
Double check the procedures of how things are
Right.
being done.
Yeah, and I think it's something where, to be quite honest, all of the prior year comments had been addressed. And this is something that Powers and Sullivan, fraud risk specifically, is something that's they're looking a little more closely at, given the trends that they've seen out there. There wasn't any specific issue in Wenham over the past year for their audit that prompted the comment. It was more a global comment of
Yeah, I wasn't
the fact
saying
that, yeah.
by intent of any sort, but more by ignorance. Okay, maybe we do have some very good policies and procedures. Safety. I mean, when you have a contracting company, common sense tells you a whole lot about how to keep people safe. Same thing with finance. I mean, just don't leave your money laying out on the counter. There's intricacies to that today that, like me, I'm not a born thief, so I wouldn't think about how best to steal from somebody or some operation.
Yeah, and since obviously this is now a month or so, and the draft letter we received sometime in early November. So since we've received this and met with Powers and Sullivan, I know Leslie and Chris have already started a program to address these issues. And I don't know if you want to give any more detail, Leslie.
Yeah. So basically, we have our financial policies in place. So now it's just to make sure that
I remember
everybody's
those well.
Right, but to make sure that these procedures are being followed. And so we've now seen what each department is doing and how they're turning, and basically it's turning in money. I mean, I think that's where you could see a fraud risk. So it's making sure that those monies are turned in on a timely basis based on our procedures and policies and procedures, and then to make sure that Chris will be the one that will go out and make sure that is being done in each department. So each department has a written procedure that we're making sure it's followed on a timely basis, and that we're giving them certain reports to make sure that that money is being, turned in, and that they can account for that. So that we're just making sure that we're following all the procedures that you guys have put in place. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I guess we don't need to have a full discussion on it here and now, but a follow-up for the board as to what is being done, what new innovations thievery comes from that none of us have heard about yet. I don't know, maybe our police chief might have some insight as well. I'm sure he has to deal with a lot of fraud cases, or some anyways. I'm just trying to open the can a little bit more and see.
Yeah, if you like, actually, John, I think that it's a good point you raise, and I should have referred to this as well. So there's a letter from Powers and Sullivan dated 12/20/17 to the Board of Selectmen, and it's really I'll call it a two-pager. So In the fraud risk assessment, I'll very quickly summarize a couple of the sub-bullets here, where they first point out the opportunity to commit and conceal fraud exists, and so on and so forth. And they're asking Wenham to do a self-assessment. And while Leslie knows the particulars of how we will operate, I think in general what they're asking municipalities to look at are as follows. What individuals have the opportunity to misappropriate assets, who have access to assets susceptible to theft and records that could be falsified or manipulated to conceal it? Are there known pressures that would motivate employees within the opportunity to misappropriate assets, financial stress or dissatisfaction? I'm paraphrasing, and there's a few more sub-bullets. What assets are susceptible to misappropriation? How could assets be stolen? Things like that. So probably through just the very nature of, account access, for example, you're kind of taking care of, limiting the manner in which things could be.
Yeah, who has access to these certain files?
Exactly, and how could you conceal it?
Information, yeah.
Right. So you may want to scan this as well, and we're happy to follow up too.
Sure.
Great.
Thank you.
Sure.
John, this is a small town, so revenues are predictable. We can set a tax rate, we know what the assessments are, and so unlike a commercial business, the revenues are predictable, and and so are the expenses. We have a budget that's approved. We have monthly financial reports. Leslie is all over each department. So I think that the ability to, and the assets are known. We have a few trucks down in the highway department, this building here, not too many other physical assets. So I think the extent that we can have a embarrassing fraud of significant financial proportions is extremely remote. That doesn't mean someone can't be running around with a truck and taking it home, or, I don't know, stealing gas down the HD highway department, using it for their personal vehicle, or some petty cash thievery, but it would have to be in a small scale which not jeopardize the financial status of the town. I mean, highly unlikely. And that I would think that would be the true of, and plus, we have 3 people in the, 2.5 to 3 people in the finance department. There's a separation of duties. The people who record financial transactions are the same people who do the cash, and so that's a big separation of duties, which has been going on for longer than I've been alive. So I think that the opportunity for us to be extremely embarrassed by a major financial fraud that would jeopardize the financial status of this town is extremely remote. Much more possible is something like ransomware, which you read about every day, and we are, along with everybody else, if we don't have good, I'll call it malware, virus control, et cetera, and keeping up our routers and other computer equipment with the various, again, anti-ransomware software, that's a much more bigger threat. And although I'm not sure they're targeting many towns and cities, it's more large corporations and hospitals, unfortunately. People can pay with Bitcom.
Well,
But anyway,
I take your words very strongly, because look what you run, a hospital. Thousands and thousands of people, a lot of unpredictable situations going on.
Yeah, it's you see that when you read about frauds, it's a lot to do with inventory. It's financial shenanigans with the books, and that valuing assets differently, not recognizing expenses, capitalizing things that couldn't be capitalized, on that stuff, as opposed to somebody actually dipping in the till and taking some petty cash, which would be small. And, I'm just making a comment. It's a generalization here, and that we're not susceptible to many of the vulnerabilities that a larger commercial enterprise would be.
Yeah, got it.
What do you think, Peter?
I would agree, Jack.
That's good.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
Sure thing, by all means. And just one other thing I'll add to that quickly is that we also covered the OPEB, the Odyssey Advisors, other post-employment benefits, which I guess is GSB 45. The FY17 results, and this is done every 2 years now to test our OPEB situation. So the findings were just basically our $5 million roughly unfunded actuarial accrued liability, which we know all about. And then, if no questions on that, I'll just point out that Rich and I voted to adopt the OPEB and the FY17 financial audit by Powers and Sullivan that evening, and then subsequently FinCom met and approved a $5,500 transfer to pay for the OPEB analysis, actuarial analysis.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I mean, I think the bottom line is it was a very clean bill of health, and
Yeah.
the only comment that was in there was general in nature and is already starting to be addressed by the finance office. So they've done a really good job.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Has it had a special delivery?
I'm not normally on my phone meeting, that was why.
Okay,
Yep, next.
okay, so.
Warrant articles.
What I was
You got
going-
5 minutes.
Yeah, well, so what I was going to say about the warrant articles is I think we've all asked Peter the question, why are there so many on the list? And I think we've all gotten the same answer, which is
Stored them up like a squirrel.
all year long, as we talk about things that should be on the warrant, he puts them in a folder. And when it gets to be town meeting time, he takes them all out of the folder and puts them on a list. And so it's basically our job, I think tonight, correct me if I'm wrong, is not really to analyze or explain or write any of these warrant articles, but just to give a yes, no, or maybe to whether we're interested in pursuing them this year. And, you know, some of them are obvious.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna try to go through them sequentially, give a very general summary, any conversation, and then it's really trying to see if we can get it down from 39 to something a little less than that.
Okay. So Peter will give a brief and then we'll say yes, no, maybe? That sound good? We'll try it?
I think yes, no, and let's discuss it further at a subsequent meeting,
Yeah. That's the maybe one.
because,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah, gotcha.
Suggestion in the future.
some of these could take it half an hour,
Could
really.
number them instead of bullet them.
They are all numbered. If you go to the next page,
And
the list is 1 through 39.
a
That's just-
general comment
Oh,
that
okay.
might, before we even get into the detail, might make people feel a little better,
Yeah.
is it seemed to me that there's a number of these that could be handled at town meeting on a consent agenda.
Yes,
So that we're really not going to be discussing however many we end up with, because there are probably 6 or so that could be taken with one vote.
absolutely.
Okay.
So the first one's
That's
budget
it.
appropriation. I think that's gonna be on there, and that's gonna be, basically, we're gonna be right up against the levy limit, right?
Right?
Article 2 is use of free cash to balance the budget. I think it's probably important that we have that second before we talk about the operating override, because we've assumed, just based on the levy limit budget, that we are funding that with $750,000 of free cash. So I think we need to get those
So-
1, 2 out of the way.
Shift them.
Nope,
Oh,
just
leave
leave
them.
them as it is, but that's why I have that second instead of the operating override. It's plugged in, and that's still the number. Then we've got the operating override, which at this point is $365,000 over the levy limit.
That would be an operating override contingent upon a ballot vote.
It would be,
Right.
correct. Yep. And obviously, we have a variety of options that Lauren had laid out in terms of the wording of that. And I would expect that we will, once the school committee has finalized their budget on the 13th, when we have our joint FinCom select board meeting on Wednesday, February 21st, to go through all the finance articles, we'll talk more about the exact language of that warrant article.
How about the debt exclusion, Peter? Is that in here someplace?
Yeah.
I-
Debt exclusions right now are the last 2 articles before elections. So,
Okay, I see it.
So these could change in order a little
the
bit.
order could certainly change. I think it would be better, so we're not constantly changing article order. I think it would be better to have that discussion now as opposed to waiting. So is the board inclined one way or another as to where the debt exclusions would fall, order-wise?
I think sooner rather than later, because we tend to lose people in the meeting, and that, I don't know, I'll take it back. I don't have a strong opinion on that.
Oh, I think I have a stronger opinion on subject area. Like if there are 3 that are specific to the schools.
I think that they should be together.
Let's talk about them
Yeah,
together, so
right.
people get a full
Right.
picture of everything that the schools are asking for.
I'm with you on that.
So then, after the operating override, we would have the 2 school debt exclusions.
I'm agreeing, totally agree.
Okay, and those are the 1 million for the sprinkler, Winthrop School sprinkler, and the 2.6 for everything else.
Presumably, if they don't change their minds again,
Yep.
which they just did in the past 10
Well,
days.
they have one more chance to change their mind next time they meet.
And I think they took the feedback from the towns and the rec board and other folks who've been involved with the turf field project in terms of the timing, and recognized that this year was not the time to move forward with it.
Remind me again, this also requires a ballot override if indeed it passes? A ballot vote, I'm sorry, right?
Yes, goes to the ballot.
If they, okay.
Okay. Moving right
The
along.
next article is free cash to fund the CIP. There's a memo from Leslie and I in your packet that outlines where we are relative to the CIP. It's right after the list of all the warrant articles. Basically, bottom line, we had initially talked about, I think, right around 215,000 of capital needs. We're now proposing just over 200,000, 200,500 in capital needs for next year, all of which would be funded with free cash. So that includes now 18,000 for the second half of town hall exterior painting. We funded the first half in FY18. 45,000 for DPW road capital. We have another 40,000 in the operating budget for next year. So we've tried to increase that number by 10,000 a year. It's funded aggregate at 75,000 this year. 17,500 for a new police department administrative vehicle. So that's year 1 of a 3-year lease, plus we're front loading the initial equipment and installation costs. $30,000 for new fire department portable radios, $40,000 for year 1 of the 5-year lease for the DPW front end loader, $45,000 for the new DPW portable truck lift, and then $5,000 for the transfer of the water department pickup to buildings and grounds. So water department's buying a new pickup truck, and it's $54,000. They'll be paying $49,000 from water reserves and $5,000 from free cash.
So remind me again, how much free cash will we have projected left after applying this free cash to these various articles?
Right. So
Approximately.
basically, if we
Exactly.
Yeah, so we will have 32,000 of unused free cash after funding 750,000 for the operating budget, leaving $250,000 minimum balance.
That's what I'm talking about. Okay.
And then using 200,000 to fund the CIP, there'll be 32,000 left. That doesn't include
32,000 above the 250.
above the 250. Yes.
Makes me feel better,
Yeah.
okay.
That doesn't include 85,000 in overlay surplus that the Board of Assessors intends to release. It also doesn't include remaining balance from our reserve fund, which, barring any major unforeseen issues coming up in the next several months, is set to come in over $100,000. So our starting position for free cash for
It's 282 plus.
well, yeah, it's more like 450,000,
Yeah.
which is actually right around where we started for this
Yep.
fiscal year.
I'm good
So
with
we
that.
haven't drained it down
Yep,
to where it's not going to be able to be built back up. One other thing I'll note,
although it still might snow up.
yes, that'll be on the February 20th agenda. Bill's annual seeking authorization to exceed his snow and ice budget.
Yeah.
So that's Article 4, or the free cash. The next Article 5, we'll call it Article 5, the 5-year lease to own for the front end loader I mentioned. That's a total cost of $200,000, 40,000 of which is going to be funded with free cash for this year. The Municipal Modernization Act requires any lease agreement in excess of 3 years to now have town meeting approval. So we're actually going to we're going to include language in the town's CIP warrant article so that we don't need to have a separate article for this. So that's going to get rolled up into Article 4.
Okay.
Article 6, I mentioned a new pickup truck for the water department, 49,000 of which will be funded with water reserves. Then Article 7 is a standard acceptance article, as has been 8.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the annual transfer for cemetery maintenance. And Article 9, that just allows us to get our chapter 150,000 of Chapter 90 money. Article 10 is actually going to be combined with Article 13. So if you remember, we had to set up new language last year for our revolving funds to comply with the Municipal Modernization Act. So we are planning to continue to maintain the school grounds. Looks like Hamilton is no longer going to be doing that, but we intend to continue that. And that cap is set annually at $20,000. We generally see somewhere between 15 and 18,000 in revenues from the work that the DPW does there. Then the iron rail building, that was set up, again, a new item that we were allowed to set up last year to divert those funds from the general fund into a dedicated revolving account to be used for capital improvements for that facility. And last year we funded that at $20,000 for FY19. We anticipate funding it at $25,000. And that's been accounted for on the revenue side in building next year's budget. And so those two will be one combined article this year.
So just to be clear on that, we can have two separate renewal of, these are not new revolving funds, but we can have two in one article with two different expenses, capital,
Yeah,
caps,
actually,
expenses,
so
all in one article?
many communities have a lot of these revolving funds, and they, before, they each had to have their own article, and that was part of the modernization, was to include them all in one and basically set a cap for each
Right, okay.
within that article.
Well, that
So
would be
10
more
and
efficient.
13 become one.
10 and 13 become one.
goes away.
Correct.
Thank you.
And the cap is 20,000 for school grounds and 25 for the iron rail. Article 11 is, so we have, over the years, taken in just over $20,000 in mitigation for larger scale projects through the water department. And that money has, to this point, so this is all of those revenues, and I think it's just over, yep, almost $21,000. All of those have resulted from the Maple Woods project. And so far, those funds have just been rolled up in the water reserve account. And so two things. One, they should be separated out so that they are used for what they're called out for in those permits. And we have obviously a number of larger scale projects coming online. So Wenham Pines, Spring Hill, and those projects have similar fee language written into their decisions. And so we want, again, those projects coming online, we want to make sure that the revenues are put in the right account. So the other thing is that we really need a better mechanism to recoup those funds. It should be done through the permitting department. Danvers has a similar program, so and that's all been approved by DEP. And so this is something that has been out there for a few years now, and you know, we're looking to set up for next year.
At another time, I'll ask you what we think we could use those funds for, but I'll save that for.
Yeah, and there are a number
there are
of
uses, but-
potential uses.
Okay.
Yep. And the warrant article would spell those, would give some detail about what
okay.
those uses would be. Article 12, so there is 23 road miles of water main infrastructure that the town of Wenham is responsible for. They were generally all put in 50s, 60s, 70s, so they're 40, 50 plus years old. They're in relatively good condition, but at some point there is going to be a need to do some pretty major replacement of those mains. And so starting next year, there's $36,000 in debt dropping off from the water budget from 18 to 19. And so what we're proposing at this point is setting up a separate capital reserve fund and including $35,000 in the water operating budget that would then be transferred into that reserve fund and would begin to build those reserves so that because, generally speaking, each road mile of water main costs about $1 million to replace. So, there's some major capital costs down the road, and to the extent that we can keep the water rates the same, deliver a balanced water department budget every year, and start to chip away at having some capital there to honestly avoid larger rate increases once that bonding has to be done. That's really the intent of this article. 13 we talked about. 14 is when we had initially set up this rental revolving account, there were a number of larger ticket capital items that need to be addressed in the near future. So those are $150,000 for a new roof for the brick building, $70,000 for paving and parking lot work, and $15,000 for a new septic system. And so total $235,000. What we're planning to do is issue a general obligation bond against the proceeds of that from that rental revolving fund. So presumably it would be a 10-year or so bond, and those funds would go right towards making those annual debt payments.
So it allows us to accumulate the money from the revolving account and use that money over the years to pay down the debt.
It means that we can do all these projects
Right away.
now as opposed to
without
trying to waiting
Right.
until 10 years from now when we actually have the money to do it all. And we're working with town council and
broken systems that
town
are
council.
Yeah.
costing you
Well,
more
it's-
money, yeah.
Yeah, and these are the three major capital issues looming for the Iron Rail facility. Article 15 is the CPA appropriations, and obviously a standard article. There's 4 projects that put in this year and were recommended for approval by the CPC, and then the standard annual minimum transfers. I think we need to really get into the details of what all those numbers are at this point.
Not for this year, but I think that the match has been dwindling, and that, so what is the expected match to be?
I don't know, I've heard everything from 25 down to 15.
That's getting pretty thin. We have a high tax rate, and we're only going to get 15% instead of 300% and 3%. So I think that a year from now, we should have a discussion about whether or not we exit the CPA. If we're going to tax our residents 3% extra in order to get either 15% or 25% match from the state. That seems to be a small amount of money, particularly since we're vying for the highest tax rate locally, and that. And plus, we have a lot of money there that we haven't spent.
I think the issue is that There's a lot of unknowns because Boston and Springfield and a handful of other larger communities are all coming online this year. I've talked to our legislative delegation. We've obviously reached out to the CPC coalition. While there's legislation potentially out there to grow the pie, I don't think realistically it's going to happen this year. So we'll have a much better sense of what the state match is going to be once they go through the process and we see how much Boston eats up of the revenues that the state's able to provide to us. I think we've projected around 15% for the purposes of, for budget purposes.
It's 0.15. Instead of 3, you don't really mean, we only get 3% right now, right?
No.
I'm talking about the match percentage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this
15
like,
is,
what is it now, in the 30s, isn't it?
it
It would
was,
be 15% of the 3%.
That's exactly.
Right, but right now, the match is,
Yeah, it's closer to 25 to
It was
30.
33.7 for fiscal 18.
yeah.
Well, it's a far way down from 100.
100, yeah.
Right.
And
Or 300, you really have to measure it, at one point, we were taxing, we were getting almost 100% match on the 3%.
Right, right.
Yes,
And now
correct.
we're down to
the
30-something.
deductibility of state and local taxes.
Yeah.
That too. And so that, I think that if it falls, even if it stays at 30,
yeah.
even if it stays at that level, I think we need to have a serious discussion of whether or not we want to recommend continuing.
So I'll just say one thing, and I think Catherine probably wants to say something too based
Yeah.
on.
Just timing-wise.
So we're in the process of updating our open space and recreation plan, which we haven't done in 15-plus years. Affordable Housing Trust is also doing an action plan. Those are the two areas where we haven't spent any money since we've adopted the CPA, and it was presumably the reason why we adopted it in the first place.
Right.
I think we're going to have a much better sense of what the need and priority in those areas is going to be going into the next budget cycle, and we'll also know what the state match is going to be too.
Well, even if we came up with 25 great worthy projects, I still think with a very thin match, we should still have the same discussion.
I don't disagree with the discussion, but I strongly agree with the timing. You're proposing it out into the future from my
Not
point
this
of
year.
view, for the reason that Peter said. Just from affordable housing, we're about to have in May a plan for how to use Affordable Housing Trust money, and the next largest really contributor historically to affordable housing has been the CPC fund for affordable housing. So I think, I agree with you, we have a lot of money that we haven't spent, and that might seem wasteful to people, but I
Oh.
think we're about to identify, with open space and with affordable housing, some opportunities for how to spend the money. So let's,
That would be great, but we're only shy 25 units to get to the 10%. So unlike Hamilton, where they have to spend millions to get there, we don't.
but I should say that the focus of, and I don't want to talk about affordable housing, but the focus of the Affordable Housing Trust is not completely and solely to get to the 10%. It's to provide housing for people in town or who want to live in this town who cannot afford it. So we may get to the 10%, and this plan will still contemplate the need for an affordable housing trust and spending of money on affordable housing.
I think that's a laudable plan and goal. However, we have to balance it off against, we're charging people money, real money, in their real estate taxes to pay for it. And so that's
Right,
the,
but I guess what I'm saying, Jack, is if we have a plan and we have an expectation that $1 million could be spent on affordable housing or
Yeah,
$5 million on open space,
yeah.
having it from the CPA, there's kind of two choices. You take it from CPA money, or you increase people's taxes,
Or you don't do it at all.
or you don't do it, but that's the reason for CPA.
That's where we're going to have a robust discussion.
Right. So let's have it next year.
Yeah.
After these two reports and after we hear what the match will be.
Yes.
I still don't get.
Let the records show that Catherine is a member of the Affordable Housing Trust as well.
Fairly passionate. We're doing some
There's no
great-
conflict here at all, of course.
I'm the selectmen's representative, and we're doing some great work, so
You were a member of the Affordable Housing Trust.
right, a member.
We know you're doing a good
So
job.
Good
I
job.
just,
Thank you for those comments.
okay, so moving on.
Okay, so 16 and 17 was a conversation that the board had, another favorite topic of yours, right? In
roll here.
August, September of this year, when we recognized that Hamilton wasn't inclined to move the date of their town meeting back
Right.
to May. We then talked about, we did a fair amount of data gathering, had, I think, discussions over at least a couple board meetings about potentially changing quorum requirements. So my understanding coming out of that process was that there would essentially be two articles. The first would change the quorum requirements for annual town meeting and special town meeting, which is annual is 5%, special is 2%. Get away from the percentages, make them the same number, and make that number 100 residents, which was based on the data that we gathered from
So
the 80+ communities.
We did not have consensus on that number, just as we might recall.
I was outvoted 2-1.
Well, I think we agreed that we could get away from a percentage.
Shamefully.
But I don't think we had a consensus on the 100.
Okay.
So
So I,
there's my,
I-
it would be,
Say it again, I'm sorry.
I think we did have consensus on the fact that it didn't need to be a percentage. Nobody uses a percentage. We have a very stable population. But that we did not have consensus that the number should be set at 100. And that's where
I'm
we
flexible on that.
disagree. And I looked at.
How about the second one, though, and the next one?
Well, and the second one is pretty straightforward. I think we did have consensus on the
Okay.
fact that the special town meeting and annual town meeting should have the same quorum, whatever.
Well, it seems
is.
ridiculous to have a smaller quorum requirement for a special town meeting
Right.
when fewer people show up, and anyway.
And somewhere in this packet, in that data, it talked about a Wenham adjusted average of 140 people.
well, so 5% is, give or take, 140 people.
Which we have attained in every town meeting since 2007.
We have.
Yeah.
Now, for my mini rebuttal.
And does.
Last year, we had a snowstorm on that. We're having a town meeting in April. We can't make it to May because Hamilton doesn't want to change it to May, okay? And so one of these years, we're going to have a snowstorm on that Saturday, and we're going to have to reschedule the town meeting, which will be a nightmare, rescheduling that town meeting.
Pretty close last year.
Pretty close last year as well. We had to wait, we had to delay the town meeting for like 25 minutes before we were told that, okay, we finally got whatever it was.
29 more people than we needed.
People
as it
did
turns
drift in
out.
afterwards when they realized it, but that's cutting it close.
So think about it, though, Jack.
I just did.
Actually, I don't think either of these articles rise, truthfully, to the importance of the other ones. So I actually have no issue with
Okay.
putting these in the maybe let's talk about it later category. But what do we have? 2,500, 2,700, 2,800 registered voters, and 100 people are going to sit at a town meeting and make the decision?
Well, you see this page right here? Look at the other towns.
I don't care about the other towns.
Well, I do.
In this case, I don't.
We're an
Because we
outlier.
but we have a history, even in April. We had 250, of course, I don't know what was going on in
Probably a school vote.
2015. I don't know what was going on. We had 250 people,
The pool vote.
the pool vote, right. So
There has to be something to
I
get
don't
about.
see data in our town that justifies lowering it to 100. 100 people. That's just,
You can't change that. I mean, we've tried a lot of different things.
but we don't
Either
need to.
popularity or there isn't.
But we're hitting the 140.
So are the other towns, presumably.
Well, but we're talking about
We're talking about
changing-
minimum requirement.
Yeah, 100. I don't see it. To me, looking at our population
so
and our
I don't really
past-
care if it's 100 or 140. I do care that one of these years, we're not going to be able to have a town meeting in April because of a snowstorm. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And the cost in trying to reschedule an annual town meeting is going to be pretty onerous. And if we had a threshold of 100 as opposed to 140, it would at least allow us during a snowstorm event to at least have an annual town meeting for those brave people who are going to brave the snowstorm.
So
Anyway,
to Jack, to that point, I think the action we should take is to continue to push for a May town meeting, not to change the quorum. And I think
disagree with that.
starting earlier, pushing a little harder.
I'm for that too.
Yeah.
That was my first choice. But we decided that both towns should have the same town meeting the same day for the reasons we discussed at an earlier selectmen's meeting. And if the other town, Hamilton, doesn't want to do that, we're stuck.
Well, but they might be open to having the conversation again, or starting earlier.
We can try it every year.
Yeah. So I think for the one
No.
in every 30 years that we might have a snowstorm, which we actually had and had 170 people there.
It wasn't a major snowstorm. It was a messy snowstorm.
Okay, whatever. I just don't see the justification. Anyway,
So Article 16 is a maybe,
is a maybe.
and Article 17 is a yes?
I think so.
Well,
The number.
I thought you agreed with me the last time we brought this up, that even though you disagreed with me, you agreed to put it on the agenda.
Oh, yeah,
What
but
do you-
not with 100. I mean, this warrant, the maybe to me is the 100.
I think the 2-to-1 vote against Jack was based on the 100.
Yes, it was.
So Jack wanted the 100 and we said no.
Yes. But you also agreed at my suggestion to put it on the agenda, let the town decide.
But not at
That was my
100.
point.
Not at 100. This is asking us to change
What-
the quorum to 100.
I'm just reminding you what the vote was during the meeting.
The vote was not 100.
The vote, well, it was 2-to-1 against.
Against
But then
100.
after the vote, I think, to Jack's point, I think you said I'd be willing to put it on the warrant.
Okay, so I wasn't clear. I would be willing to,
Then or now?
Yeah.
whatever.
Let's take here, let's go back to the.
I never agreed to the 100. And
know
I
you
would be
didn't.
willing
I
to
know.
contemplate putting it
That's the
on an
beginning.
agenda.
Catherine, I know you didn't agree to 100. No one's arguing that. But you did agree to at least put it on the agenda, let the town decide, at my suggestion.
Yeah, so I agree, but let them decide on a different number,
Like what?
120. Now I'm horse trading.
Okay, discussion later.
Okay. But the next one, I think we did agree on, that we would, whatever we ended up with in Article 16 would be the same, for special and annual town meeting. We don't have that number yet, but,
But it would be a percentage. It would go to that,
well, we're
No, it'd
talking
be a-
about getting away from percentages.
No, I like to see a numerical number.
Right, and I'm okay with that, as long as it's the right
All
number.
numbers numerical?
Yeah, yeah, well, not a relative number, an absolute number.
Yes, right.
So we do have to come up with a number even to do number 17.
We'll discuss that later, I
So-
guess.
See what I mean? Okay,
18, 19,
that was, that's a
so
long.
18,
halfway through, Jack.
18, 19, 20, and 21, we can cross off our list because we already talked about it.
yep.
All related to marijuana.
Yeah.
22 is, while the state legislature continues to struggle to put any legislation in place that would regulate Airbnb, so-called Airbnb. We obviously have a number of those establishments here in town, and there is a bylaw that was approved by our neighbors over in Manchester to deal with similar issues.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, I think last year, and I think it's a general policy question as to whether we want to put similar regulations in place that would basically require those establishments to come annually, presumably before the Board of Selectmen. At least that's how they have it set up in Manchester.
Well, what would the impact of the state coming up with something have on? what
It's
we
been
would-
long talked about. I wouldn't hold our breath for something to come out of that process. There's 80 different iterations out there. It's
I mean, I don't
been,
quite see where we generate much for revenues from it.
it's not necessarily a revenue issue. It's more of a regulation issue to make sure that they're
Board of Health type stuff.
complying with certain minimum safety standards and something like that.
Yeah, I mean, in a residential district, you can turn one house or two houses into, a semi-commercial district by basically having an extremely robust Airbnb thing. And I think this is a good article for the town to discuss and decide.
I agree.
Okay.
And I know that obviously for all of these zoning bylaw changes, the planning board will be talking about them, meeting on Thursday, and then having public hearing if they support moving forward with any of them as well. So I'll say the next 3 zoning bylaws are all stemming from applications that have come before the planning board over the course of the past year that we've realized there is a policy position in the bylaw that we're not sure if the planning board actually supports the position that it takes, or whether past practice isn't necessarily in compliance with this. So this is something that town council, in working with the planning board and ZBA a little more closely, has realized that some of the decisions that have been rendered previously might not necessarily line up exactly with how the bylaw is written. So they're related to accessory apartments, paper streets, and common driveways. And absent any particular interest from the board, I'll leave it at that. Is that okay? Okay. Article 26 is, again, back on our radar. We've talked about this off and on over the past several years. So this is really twofold. The first part is to set aside a particular location to have signs in town. We talked about the area in front of Pingree Park as being that location. And the other is to have KMP take their best rewrite of our existing sign bylaw to make sure that it is in compliance with the case law that's out there, because that's always a moving target, and we want to make sure that what we have on the books is consistent with the most recent court decisions in that area. Article 27 is really just, it's a typographical error. It's something we normally wait when we go when we bring the codification to town meeting next year. But this is something where there is some potential, as I mentioned at a meeting I think in December, there's some level of interest by cell tower providers to site a tower in town, specifically within the overlay where this reference is missing. And so it was just something where we wanted to make sure that that was addressed so that there were no issues when and if a project did move forward.
Okay.
Article 28 is the Longfellow Road and South Street Home Rule petition. Mm-hmm. I would expect that that has continued to move forward over the past couple months. Weston and Sampson was up there last Friday doing the borings for the geotechnical work, and we're working on with them on this expedited schedule to try to turn around those findings into some recommendations on fixes specifically at the ravines, so we have a sense of what the cost would be, and then impose the betterment on the residents.
So if we have all of the information that we said we needed in the time frame that we have, we've committed to putting an article on town.
I think so.
We have, and
if we don't, we won't.
Correct, and we've also committed to providing some local match toward the project, recognizing, until we know the scope of it, we really can't say how much that contribution is going to be.
But we need to come up with that before town meeting.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And we will have that, otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And then we
Can't be
petition
making the sausage.
It'd be a home rule petition.
Like, we'll let
Yeah,
you know.
Because it would be special legislation because
Right.
of the way that we're going to structure the betterment and the fact that the town is contributing. We have to go through the home rule petition process. But it's going to be very narrowly construed. It's not going to be a blanket betterment for private ways home rule petition like some other towns have. Article 27 is 29, excuse me, is the acceptance of Settlers Lane as a public way. That project has been completed. We received the as-built, I think, yesterday from the developer. And so that will go through the standard public hearing process with the planning board. Obviously, if there are any issues with the as-built.
Settlers.
It's on the Hamilton line,
Arbor Street.
heading out on Arbor Street.
Oh, okay.
So this is a routine process that's already been built into their
It's built into their decision.
And
Once
now they've reached all of
Correct.
the milestones they need to reach.
Correct. It's a relatively short dead-end road. I forget exactly how many units are on it. Stephen, do you remember?
Seven.
Seven? I was going to say
Seven.
6, so there we go.
Well, I think 6.
Two of which are Hamilton.
Right.
Right, but it's 6, are there 7 units, or there's 6 units and still the one lot?
There's still, 6 and the one
Yeah,
lot.
yeah,
So
6 houses,
So
right.
6 wasn't.
So, Peter, this and a couple of other articles you've already mentioned require the planning board review and adjudication. This is February, March, April. We've got 7 weeks to go. We have to, publish a warrant, it's probably 6 weeks. Isn't there a requirement that it has to be like 30 days after their decision that can be appealed or something like that?
So they have to hold a public hearing, and they, right now, I believe they're scheduled for that hearing on, basically within the time limit that they have to get it
Okay.
on the warrant and
Oh,
go to
okay.
town meeting. Yeah,
Okay.
we've been tracking the
All right.
schedule all the way through.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Article 30. So we, back in 2004, I believe, we accepted 2 other similar local option statutes that allows residents to make contributions for a scholarship fund and for elderly residents. And it was a standalone, separate from your tax bill. You could make those payments. And it was on our tax bills for a number of years, and then somehow in the transition of things got dropped off. This is a relatively new local option specifically for veterans assistance. And the thought here would be there are some funds in those other accounts still, back from when they were collected back 10 plus years ago. So that we would put 3 options to make contributions on the tax bill. So it would be for scholarship fund, elderly, and then adding the veterans. And I know we obviously have a still relatively new Veterans Committee. They're looking to do some more targeted outreach to the veterans. And I think they would, be in charge of dispensation of these funds for various uses. I know I talked to Jack about this particular one.
This didn't come up at our last meeting, but I'm sure the committee would be highly in favor of this.
I think they were talking about some small budget, potentially small line item in the budget.
Well, no, actually, there was quite a, the proud committee thought that they shouldn't use any town funds at all. I pointed out that our secretary here is being paid by the town, and they couldn't reconcile my comment with their policy decision, and they just adjourned the meeting. But I do think there should be a small amount of money, for, again, a small amount of money, a couple $1,000 for paying for bailings and stuff like that, I think that would be consistent with the spirit of what I heard of the meeting, if not necessarily the actual vote. But
So this would be an opportunity for a donation, and those
Correct.
donations could be used for those purposes.
Correct.
yeah.
Yep.
Although I think the committee would want to vote on how this thing would, the proceeds be used, but anyway,
Well, that and,
It's defined in the statute too.
okay.
well, but to the point, as an aside, I guess, to have these funds donated is great. We have a Veterans Committee, but we also have scholarship money sitting there and elderly and disabled money sitting there, and I don't think that we have a mechanism, active mechanism, to disperse the money. So if we're going to continue to have these, we ought to have some group that is responsible for giving it out, rather than having it just
Well,
sit around.
for the veterans, I'm
And the
suggesting
veterans,
that'd be that committee. And
we have a committee to,
there was some confusion over what are some of the other benefits. We have a senior workout program, obviously, that I think it's now $1,500, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Up to,
And that, is there one for veterans as well?
there is.
Okay, that wasn't well-known amongst the committee.
was newish?
Really?
Was that last year?
This year,
Yeah.
this past
Or-
year.
Correct.
Well, no one could articulate it,
Right.
including me. So I think that next time we have a veterans meeting, maybe you could pull out some, whatever the literature is, so that we can remind the committee of How many people actually avail themselves of that opportunity? Probably none, but nevertheless,
For the Veterans Program, Work-Off Program, this first year, 0.
yeah.
Oh, I
So
thought
they
there
would
was
might.
one.
Huh?
There will be one for this new year, but for
Okay.
the first year, there was one, right? Yeah,
One now.
yeah, there's one now,
Right,
but
now.
it just started.
They need to be apprised of what the details are, and that,
Yep.
that's all.
And actually, if I understand it correctly, there are people, elderly people, who are also veterans, who can free up the elderly tax work-off spots by going onto the veterans' tax work
That's the
spots.
piece
Right.
I want.
Right,
Yeah.
so allows us to actually help more people.
That being said, and we're gonna talk about the overlay in
Yeah.
2 articles, it all comes from the same pot. So the veterans work-off is from the overlay, same as senior tax work-off. We've capped the senior tax work-off at $15,000. We haven't capped the veterans because nobody's really availed themselves of it at this point.
Well, thank God we have a Veterans Committee, because, planning for the Memorial Day and other things like that, it was, that fell through the cracks when Don Luxon decided he had enough and retired, so now there's a good, robust committee doing that.
Okay, so 31?
31 is Chapter 40U, which is another local acceptance option. And really what this does is it allows us to not have to go through the non-criminal disposition process for certain bylaw violations. So it's pretty narrowly construed, but I think the 2 more important ones that would allow us to set up a local hearing process and to put those violations, those fines on residents' tax bills are water use restrictions, which I know we've talked obviously a fair amount about, and zoning bylaw violations. So this is relatively new, but KMP's put together a warrant article that would, again, allow us to not have to go through Ipswich District Court, which, by the way, just sent a letter, I think, sometime in the past couple of weeks to the chief, basically strongly recommending that we not use the courts for non-criminal disposition.
Okay.
So I think, again, it's another way to do, better enforcement and get the results that we're trying to.
We'll have the stocks installed out here in the front.
That's right.
We did find people last year, right, who went above the $100 a day for the excess water usage. Didn't we do that? You had the authority to write the tickets, I know.
Ultimately, there were warnings issued, but no specific fines.
People heeded the warnings, apparently.
Yes.
Is that what we're
And
gonna
Santa
assume?
Claus is coming,
Well-
or the Tooth Fairy,
They
too.
got the warning, they reduced their water usage, or we didn't notice that they were
Yeah,
continuing.
the outdoor
to.
water, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, that's what we think the biggest contributor to that
Right.
is outdoor watering, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
No, I don't think anything changed at all. Anyway. Some people might have heeded the warning, but anyway.
So Article 32 is the senior circuit breaker program, which again is something that very few residents avail themselves of.
I have no idea what it is, so I hate to admit that. It sounds great, but
I'm with you on that one.
if we're going to give more flexibility, I think we're gonna have to understand what it does now.
So right now, we provide exemptions. We looked over the past 5 years, anywhere from 9 to 13 exemptions. They're $1,000 each. We receive some reimbursement match from the state, but that's a fixed number, and will continue to be under this program. The flexibility that the 41C.5 would allow the town is in several different areas. Right now, it's 70 plus are eligible, and we could reduce that down to 65. It's a fixed number, $1,000 exemption for each person, and we could amend that anywhere from 5 to 20%. And just to give you a sense, 5% right now would put us at 575, so we clearly wouldn't want to do that. 10% increases it to 1,050, but then it follows the tax rate, so it's not a fixed number.
Oh.
And then we could change, let me just double check.
It's going to be a long town meeting.
Those are the major changes that could be made. And I think it's really twofold. Obviously, as Jack mentioned, our tax rate is one of the highest around, and if we're talking about an operating override and multiple debt exclusions, we're going to be talking about a tax rate $20 per thousand or more for FY19. So I think anything we can do to give a little more relief to elderly residents, especially those on fixed incomes, would, be something that should be considered. I will say that our state match will not increase if we increase our limit, and so these funds currently come out of the overlay and will continue to do so. That pot's only so big. We've budgeted again $135,000 for the overlay for next year. So there is a little bit of capacity in the overlay based on historical averages and what we use for the senior tax work-off and veterans and these the senior circuit breaker program now. But I don't know that we want to go to the 20%, for instance, because that would be a significant increase. I think the other thing is we need to do a better job of getting word out about the program.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah.
The eligibility for the program
Yep.
is set by the state.
It is.
And their income eligibilities.
It is. Yep, and there are
Do we
state
think
standards.
that there are significantly more people that are eligible than actually apply?
Yeah.
So it would be useful, I think, as we go through these, finally, to put a dollar number on them to the
Well,
extent that we can,
what the
How
impact-
much will the impact be if we did whatever?
And this is a
Went to
little hard because I think
65.
even if we didn't change this at all and we just kept the 41C that we have, my guess is if we did more targeted outreach to seniors through the Council on Aging about this program, more education, that would increase in and of itself outside of changing from a fixed number to a percentage.
Right. I think we could make some assumptions, though,
Yep.
possibly.
Yep. Yeah, other communities are looking at this as well, and you can definitely make some assumptions.
Senator Tarr's office has got some nice brochures that they've been leaving at the senior center. You might want to include them in a tax bill or something.
Be a way to get outreach, I guess.
So we'll have a lot, this is actually one of the more complicated ones, and so this is something that we'd have a lot more information on at our joint meeting with the FinCom on the 21st. As long as the board's interested in us continuing to explore it, yes? Okay. Again, so we have a tax deferral program for elderly residents as well. Very few residents avail themselves of it. I think we've got one. None now.
Oops.
Right. But right now, the interest rate for that is 8%, and can be decreased by a town meeting vote. So we've reached out to other area communities, and they generally have it set at 4 or 5%. In the off chance that somebody were to, need this relief and apply for these funds, our thought was that we're not looking to make money on this kind of situation. So if we can get that down to 4%, that would be in line with what other communities do.
And where does that money come from? I presume it's tax relief, or do we just reduce? Do we subsidize? I don't understand this program.
Okay.
No, they would,
Yeah.
I guess clearly I need more education on
They just
senior.
applied through the assessor's office, or the Board of Assessors, and then that is just, we kind of treat it in, keep it separate, like in the tax title, and it's just earns interest at 4%. So then if, they have to apply for it every year, and they would have to pay it off if they were to pass away, or the house was sold. So, and then they pay off the taxes plus interest.
It's hard to pay it off after you passed away, but anyway, I got it. The estate would,
We just had one that has
So,
just done that. So
I guess
it
I'm
hasn't-
still not clear. So they come for an application because they can't afford their
it's
taxes.
less revenue, Catherine.
Right, so they can't have a
It's just
mortgage.
less
I mean,
revenue.
I don't know all the particulars. Again, that is done in the assessor's office, but they basically can't have a mortgage or
Right.
anything on their house.
Right.
They apply to defer their taxes because they cannot afford it at
So
that
they're
time.
not paying any taxes. They're deferring.
As long as they
them.
defer it, yes. And the Board of Assessors can opt to do all or partial of those taxes, and they have to do that every year. And then they give me that amount. We put it as, obviously, you track it in a different way at, right now, 8% and if you.
8% might have been fair 7 or 10 years ago,
Yeah,
but you can
yeah.
get a mortgage now for under
We're-
4%, so 4% seems like a very reasonable period.
When this is paid back at some point, in time, that's when the interest rate
Correct.
is applied.
Well, it's
Well,
applied
yeah.
every year, the
It's
payments
applied
go
per
up.
diem,
That's what I
yes,
meant, the
applied,
payment
yes.
That's when it's paid.
Right.
And okay, I
Right.
got it now.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
And yes, 8% seems very high in this.
Well, 10 years ago, maybe not, but today, certainly.
Yeah.
Particularly since we're trying to give people a break.
Yeah,
You know,
right?
but,
Give them a break and then charge them their state, probably.
34.
So Article 34, there was some conflict between our zoning bylaws and general bylaws about how many associate ZBA members there were. We clarified that just over a year ago, and it's now 3. The town has the option to create an associate position for the planning board, as long as they are a special permit granting authority, which they are. But to do so, we'd have to get approval of town meeting, and it could be set up either as an elected position or an appointed position. And in talking to KMP, they've seen it both ways. Not clear whether the planning board or the Board of Selectmen would be the appointing authority if that were the case.
It seems interesting to have someone run for election to be an associate member of a board. Feels like appointment is the likelier
Totally agree.
avenue, but
Totally agree.
whichever board has that
I think it
authority.
should be the Board of Selectmen.
Well, well,
Obviously, we're the Board of Selectmen.
right. But it might be statutory.
I go along with that.
It's not.
It's not statutory, so it could be either.
It could be either. Yeah,
Okay.
it can be
Then,
elected or
of course.
appointed, or if it's appointed,
So
it can.
appointed by the Board of Selectmen, why not?
Exactly.
And I know this is something that the planning board is going to have on their agenda as well.
And we can have a fight on the town floor.
Well, I think,
Us
like
against
any
them.
other appointment that we make, it's an appointment that has been discussed with the planning board, so it's not like we're doing it in we would make an appointment in a vacuum.
Well, this is televised.
Well, right, but, if we have a candidate right now for any appointment, they usually go to a meeting, et cetera.
A letter of
Okay.
interest and so forth. And
Right.
this person couldn't vote unless there was somebody didn't show up for a meeting, same as the ZBA
Correct.
rules?
Yeah,
Okay, I
it's
got it.
a similar rule.
It's
Similar rule.
been important in the other
I think it
boards,
is
so
important, yeah.
I think it is a good
Yeah.
thing.
So 35 is, as you know, we have minimum attendance requirement for the finance committee, so 5 successive meetings unless you're ill. If you don't attend, then you vacate your position. We've had a handful of different boards and committees that have had some issues with attendance and meeting quorum because of it. So the question is whether the board would be interested in putting similar language to apply across the board to appointed
I'm
boards
in
and
favor.
committees.
I am too. It does, even though it doesn't apply to sickness, I think I don't know if there's any language that can be in there, but if someone has an extended illness that is going to keep them from meetings for months, it seems as if there ought to be, maybe if we have associates, it's not an issue, but if the quorum is not able to be reached because someone has an
That could
extended
become
illness, that's
problematic, yeah.
problematic as well, and I don't know how we address that.
Well, use the language in the, from the FinCom. and that,
FinCom just says,
says-
absent from 5 successive meetings, except
Except.
in case of illness.
Right.
So we can check to see if
Do
town
we-
council has any other
Right.
language.
Yeah, without that, you might get somebody just doesn't show up.
Well, it's happened for, sort of innocent reasons.
People going to Florida for several months,
Right,
for example.
for example.
And
But
not coming back like I do, that's
but-
terrible.
go for a week, come back for a week. But I'm asking specifically to see if there's anything that we can do for, especially permitting kinds of boards that would have people who have extended absences because of health, and therefore can't meet a
Yeah,
quorum.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I don't know, that may be discriminatory, but that would be a question I would ask.
That's reasonable. Some people who just signed up for this just don't come. I mean, it's
Well, that too.
not very common, but, when you have
Well, they're
quorum
very busy
requirements, it's
and-
important that
yeah.
people show up. And if you have somebody who's elected for 5 years or 3 years, that you don't want to, perpetuate a vacancy for that long a period of time. Wouldn't happen very often, but I think having the bylaw to basically remove that person, fill with an attending person is desirable to have.
Not sure how it ended up only on FinCom, but doesn't seem reasonable.
36 is looking to change the moderator term from 1 year to 3. Trudy had reached out and essentially asked the board to consider putting this on the warrant, and she's done some research which is included in the packets. And really, across the state, it's about an even split, 1 year term versus 3 year term. On Essex County, it's more 1 year term than 3. But obviously, there's a pretty steep learning curve for the moderator. It's an important position. We had the same moderator for many, many years, and so the term wasn't ever really an issue. And I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the case going forward. So it would be a town meeting vote, and then it would go on the ballot as well. So I think the question is whether the board would want to put it on the warrant, and if they did, if they also wanted to include it in the ballot for this year.
I would be in favor of it with the caveat that I think the town meeting should understand, for Essex County at least anyway, how many towns have 1 year and how many towns have 3. So, to give context to the vote.
Yeah, I agree.
Essex County, 19 1-year terms, 6 3-year terms.
I think, I think the voters should understand, what
Right.
the
And,
count
yeah,
is.
the benefits of 3 year,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. It's a pretty simple one, I think. And we have a ballot anyway. It's not as if
Yeah,
we're going to have
yeah.
a ballot just for this.
We do. And then we have Articles 37 and 8, which we already talked about, the 2 debt exclusions, and 39 is the elections. So
Dun-da-da.
we did it.
Okay.
So
Good job.
there is one maybe and no no's.
And no nos. Yeah.
Okay, just
So
on
we
the
cut that
record.
list right down, didn't we?
Okay.
Well, I think there could be some no's to come if the planning board doesn't.
Correct, yeah.
So some of those bylaw ones could end up being no's.
So, Peter, I'd like to suggest that, in view of the fireman and police officer here, that we go to G and H out of order before we time out here. Because these people have been dutifully listening to us attentively, or at least they look like they're attentive,
They're used to staying awake in boring situations.
Yeah, well, they should
Waiting for something to
run
happen.
for office. Okay, scope of work for shared fire apparatus feasibility study. Who has that? I think it's me, actually. Oh, it is me. Why don't you describe background?
Yeah,
here, Peter?
so obviously there've been off and on discussions over the years. that have been particularly led by Hamilton the past few years, expressing interest in looking at the feasibility of fully combining the fire departments. There was a most recent time Wenham took this up was in 2014. There were a number of staffing changes made at the time. Obviously, at this point, our call model works and is the most cost-effective model, and fully regionalizing, consolidating with Hamilton, whatever terminology you want to use, really doesn't make any financial or operational sense here for us. Hamilton, sometime in the next year, either at this annual town meeting or their next special town meeting, is looking at replacing one of their trucks at a cost of around $600,000. And so they expressed interest in looking just narrowly at conducting a feasibility study that would assess whether we could share apparatus and the fleet. So Michael Lombardo and I had several discussions with Municipal Resources, Inc. We think they're well-positioned. They would be well-positioned to do this kind of study. They've got a team of experienced fire chiefs on staff who do this kind of work on a regular basis. And so they put together a scope of work looking that would, look to undertake this evaluation work and look at both fleets to see whether they meet national standards currently, looking at a replacement schedule for all of the vehicles, and then obviously potential savings by coordinating the purchasing of our vehicles and presumably sharing one or multiple pieces of apparatus. And included in the scope of work is obviously there are a lot of questions around kind of the operational side of things, training, maintenance, insurance, all of those kind of logistical concerns, and they plan to include that in their report. And the quote that they gave based on this scope of work is just under $10,000, half of which, at least half of which would be funded by Hamilton. And they already have the funding in place to move forward with the project.
So I think that's a terrific idea. I mean, some of these fire trucks are very, very expensive. Was it almost $500,000 the last one we ordered?
It was just over $400,000, but they clearly are the most expensive pieces
Right.
of equipment that we have to replace.
Chief, want to come up and comment on this? Fire chief, that is.
Good evening.
Hi.
Good evening.
I think it would probably work somewhere down the road, 10 years, 15 years from now.
Really?
We don't need a truck.
Yeah.
So they need one now. Our model isn't broken right now, so
So we're out of sync with their
Yes.
needs and our need versus
Yes.
our needs.
So you're saying we wouldn't need a new fire truck for the next 10 years?
Yeah.
We're recording
Really?
that, just,
Excuse me, make sure that, make that capital letters and that,
But there's a lot more to it too.
Yeah.
We have 5-inch hose, they have 4-inch hose.
oh,
And you're not gonna split the bed, 5-inch and 4-inch, the
They're gonna have to
fittings
change.
on the truck. It would disrupt the mutual aid system.
what do you do for other towns? Not other, what about Beverly and Danvers? Do they all have the same size hoses that you have?
No,
Well, don't you have the same problem with the other towns then, with mutual aid?
you have adapters.
Well, then why
It all
wouldn't the adapter,
depends.
why wouldn't the adapter work with Hamilton's hoses?
Well, you could. It all depends who's gonna.
Do
You
the
gonna put it
adapter-
all with 5-inch hose or 4-inch hose.
why do you say it would disrupt the mutual aid?
Because if we call for a pump, we're calling for our own pump.
So
And
that
vice
would
versa.
not be considered
In other words, you
mutual
have
aid,
double
is that what
need.
you're saying?
But I think part of the work that MRI planned to do was look at our mutual aid network, not just obviously with Hamilton, but Topsfield and Beverly and Danvers and all of our butters that we regularly respond to mutual aid. Right now, mutual aid, obviously, it's what makes the fire system work. But we're out of town more than we're receiving mutual aid on about a 3-to-1 ratio.
Jeepers creepers.
So there are resources in those other communities that could be called on. And I don't necessarily, pretend to have the answers. I just think that there is certainly a mutual aid network that is out there.
Yes, and it works well.
Right.
So the one thing in this that caught my eye, one of the things that caught my eye, is that as part of this process, MRI would look at all of ours and Hamilton's present apparatus and review it for compliance with nationally recognized standards and good practices. That's a great idea. I mean, I think in general, to understand if this is a good idea is a good idea. But that could have some potential downsides. If this report comes out and says half of our fleet doesn't comply with nationally recognized standards and good practices, what do we do with that? That would be a discussion.
To ask.
That would be a discussion.
Well, we should know that, though, shouldn't we?
Yes, and we do keep up with them.
We should.
We do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess if we're going to know it, this is the way to know it, to have someone.
Maybe
from the
Hamilton
outside.
doesn't. I don't know.
I know, I'm just saying it could give us some data that we wish we didn't have. Because it could force us to take some action that
Wouldn't that be good?
unless it's,
Might be costly, but we should, I mean, that's like saying, oh,
well, yeah, just a potential, it sounds like this is, but in general, the understanding the feasibility, I don't know yet whether I agree with this yet, but understanding the feasibility of it seems to make some sense.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we don't know.
Yeah, I
If it's
mean,
not
from
gonna
a-
save us
from a
money,
city
if-
Point of view, I mean, I've watched these guys for over 10 years now, and you brought me right into the heart of it with personal equipment and truck equipment, and I've never once had a question or concern about
Yeah.
the quality of the equipment and the training. I mean, we as management have always supported it.
Yeah.
Well, for a while it was a little less supported, but it is strongly supported, and I would expect it to stay that way. It's their lives that are on the line with all of this
Yeah, I
equipment.
presume that if we went forward with the study, there would be heavy input from the fire department leadership, and that's for all the reasons that some of you just articulated a minute ago, that here are the reasons why it's not a good idea, or if it's not a good idea now, it might be a good idea 10 years from now, or whatever. So that, but I think that the taxpayers in this town really, we owe them to delve into a very expensive piece of town equipment, and that if it's not a good idea now, and maybe not a good, give it a shot. It's only $10,000, and that anyway, I'm mumbling.
It's fairly small money for the study. It is probably useful information. Again, I would need to see this information before I could say.
Well, yeah, this is a
Absolutely
feasibility
sure.
study.
Right.
Yeah. All we're discussing today and possibly voting on, it's a feasibility study. Not, we're
Yes.
not, that, and that if it's feasible but difficult, along the lines that he just gave one example, I'm sure you can give 2 or 3 others, I don't know. But it'd be
Chief, are you
interesting to know.
recommending this?
I actually sat down with Chief Stevens today, and we both do not think it'll work.
And
Just the way
so-
the 2 departments are.
So I guess my question is,
But yes, it's useful information.
is it not worth understanding what it would look like and what, I mean, I know there are a lot of questions out there.
Oh, yeah.
It feels like, to Jack's point, this is, while we might not have, one of our trucks on the horizon to be replaced, when they do come online, it's a major capital investment. And so it feels like if there are any potential maybe it's not the frontline vehicles,
Right.
that could potentially be shared.
Do you know if this is going to be presented to the Hamilton Board of Selectmen?
My understanding is that Hamilton has a consultant line item in their town manager budget, and that there's funding in that. I don't know that I don't think it requires the Board of Selectmen approval over there, and I don't know if it's intended to go to their attention. I know that obviously for here, it would require a reserve fund transfer because we don't have funding for it anywhere.
Well, I would like to see, whether it's required or not, I would like to see, for my vote, that the Hamilton Board of Selectmen review this and with the chiefs and approve it, whether or not, I'm sure Michael Lombardo has the authority to do it. However, if the majority of the Board of Selectmen in Hamilton are not for it as well, I would be concerned about going forward.
I agree with Jack. It may not be required, but we need to hear where they are with this.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not quite
And
sure I
hopefully the
see
chief,
value
Chief
in-
Stevens is gonna be invited to
Yeah.
give his, maybe they'll invite you too.
Yes.
Gang up on them, I don't know.
So if I understand the reasons that you're not in favor of this, it's because we don't need it at the moment and won't for the foreseeable
Yep.
horizon. You know, we don't have new vehicles that we need.
And is
Yeah,
the-
I mean, there's no need for it right now, and it's, I mean, how would you do is it gonna be a 50-50 split, or are you gonna do what we did with the emergency center, 65-35?
that would be something that would be.
You have to equip the truck. We may not use the same equipment they use.
Well,
So
if,
those things you don't think could be overcome.
Oh, they could be overcome, yes. Yes.
which would be documented in the feasibility study, presumably.
Yeah.
And
But-
I think the other issue is there no ability for Hamilton to forego purchasing their new truck and pay Wenham for the use of our truck?
Do we have the truck that they are looking to buy?
I think in another probably 5 years, they're gonna have to replace another one too.
But the one that they're looking to put on this town meeting, is that a vehicle that we already own?
No. They own.
But we don't have a duplicate or a redundancy, so
No,
they
I think
couldn't
there's
use
a
ours.
Pierce. They're going,
Going for Pierce, we're just top of the line.
yeah, like 600,000.
It's the same type of vehicle. It's a different model and
Yes.
and a different level of, I mean, they're honestly,
It's a Cadillac, not an Oldsmobile?
sure.
Yeah. And it would have to be stored at their station, because unless they had it specially built
Right.
to fit in our 10-foot doors.
Right.
Right, which is a problem we're going to.
But our truck could fit in their station, right? We're the ones who have the
So
height
we have
restrictions.
we have a truck that has the same capability as the one that they're buying, but maybe doesn't
Oh,
have
yes.
some of the
Yeah.
fancier
And
things.
we're still due to spend $80,000 or thereabouts for the next 3 fiscal years on debt payments for that truck.
Oh, that's the truck that they're looking to replace, okay.
And on Peter's point, I would say, I wouldn't be looking at a frontline piece to share. Maybe a third or fourth end piece, that'd be it.
You would not be looking at a front line
I wouldn't share a frontline truck, no. Wouldn't be worth it.
for all those
What if they have
reasons.
a fire? And people say, oh, what are the chances? The chances are actually very high.
So how many structure fires do we have a year, Chief?
Oh, I know, probably 2, but that would be the day it lands on. And that's
what
when
the-
we use mutual aid.
And that's what you.
Well, that's
use
like a
mutual aid for.
snowstorm in April and May for the town meeting.
It's gonna be a fire and a snowstorm, Jack.
If it's on the same day, the snow will put it out.
Oh, gosh, okay.
I think Dan would like to say something too.
Please.
Hi, Dan Sullivan.
Hi, Dan, thank you.
I'm here probably to be a little more blunt, a little less polite than the chief who has to play the political game. I would implore you to reject the study, save the money. Sharing apparatus will not work under any circumstances that I can consider. Averaging 300 calls a year for the last 20 years, I rack my brain and I cannot think of one case where having a truck over there would work for the town of Wenham as a firefighter and as a taxpayer. It feels like they're trying to trick us, to me it feels like they're trying to trick us into buying part of their fire truck. And I say it's their fire truck because it's sitting in their station. I can't foresee any reason why I would drive by this station to go to their station to pick up a call to come back to Wenham. I can't see how our day shift would walk out of our station, buy all of our fire trucks, and go to Hamilton to get a truck to come back to Wenham. So you say, I mean, at this very moment, if I need a truck from Hamilton, I can call on the radio and they're going to send their truck with their men or women to us. So having our truck over there, you know, they'd be sending us our own truck with their people. If we're talking about going mutual aid, say Ipswich has a fire, they're going to call Hamilton and Wenham for pumps. We're going to send a pump with 4 people. They're going to send a pump with 4 people. Realistically, we're sending 1.5 pumps. We're paying for all the wear and tear, all the use on the pump we're sending, plus the pump they're sending. And I mean, I know it's only $5,000, but $5,000 to us is 3 months of training. That's a lot of money to us. And I think what you're going to do is you're going to arrive at, or these experts that will have to spend time learning how Wenham works, will arrive at the fact that unless we're merging departments, that I look at it the same way. If we had a truck in this in North Beverly, we're not going to go get that truck. If they're buying a frontline piece of apparatus, frontline means it's first out the door. So if they have a fire, their truck is out the door. We're then not going to, you know, we have something and we need a truck. We're not going to go take one of their trucks. We would only take the mutual truck. It just logistically, from an operational standpoint, it just makes no sense. And I hope, you know, you would trust the leadership team. You know, obviously took a hit with Chief Blanchard retiring, but we still have almost 75 years of combined experience working on the needs of Wenham, from, you know, equipment, procedures, everything. And there's just, if it's in their bay, it's their truck, no matter what the sticker says. And if we need it as a frontline piece, we're going to have frontline pieces here. So we're going to spend maybe $300,000, whatever it is, for a truck that will, I mean, unless I'm ordered to use it, it's just, I'm not going to go over and get it.
And that brand new truck isn't going to be the one sitting behind there for the 2 of us.
Right.
It's going to be one they pick that's going to go back, or both of us pick.
And I was just to say, one quick thing, Peter kind of stole the thunder. I said, if you want to see how much they really want to share a truck, ask them to give you a check for $225,000 to buy half of engine 3. And if we're not using it, they use it. And I would doubt that they would think that that would be logistically possible.
Well, and I think that
We can ask them.
I think
All for it.
I think the fact that they are looking at purchasing a new truck has kind of gotten confused with this particular feasibility study, which is not to say that the conclusion is they're going to buy their new truck and this is how we're going to share it. It's to look globally at the fleet and say they don't need to purchase a new truck. They can use ours and make payments towards it.
And that's the problem. 20 plus years of experience, I can't imagine how the usage would actually benefit us or the taxpayers of
They
one.
run fleets of vehicles. The minute you
I mean, we have,
distribute the authority to another driver, another department,
we have,
start losing control of maintenance and
you know, the squad, the air trailer. I mean, we bought those through grants. The ambulance was bought from the gift account for $7,000. I mean, we're pretty prudent with what we ask you for. We're not buying Cadillacs. We have a $425,000 pump, not a $600,000 pump, because it's adequate. And I just don't think that an outside company is going to have more expertise than us. And logistically and operationally, even if we said, yeah, it's a great deal, the operation of it would be minimal. We would go and use it for training because we have to, not because we need to.
So just to clarify, I don't think that the suggestion to do a feasibility study is in any way related to the fact that we don't think the fire department is prudent with their money or financially good stewards. I think even this suggestion, whether we go forward with it or not, is in reaction to the fact that we're budgetarily, financially, really up to a difficult time. And it's going to get harder. And we're looking for every opportunity where we can save our taxpayers some money. And I think it makes some logical sense to think, well, okay, you're going to look at the biggest ticket items first, or potentially. And so I just want to clarify, this isn't because we think, oh.
And I appreciate you looking out for the taxpayers as one of them.
So we have to balance
I get that,
everything.
but we studied the merging of the fire departments at least 4 or 5 times in my career, and each time it has come back the exact same answer, and it just, I feel like I'm trying to save us $5,000 because the end result is, even if you share a truck, we're not going to benefit from its usage.
So, Peter, I have a suggestion, actually multiple suggestions. One, I'd like to ask you, the leadership, to go back and write a memo to us, a comprehensive memo for all of the reasons that you think we shouldn't proceed on this, much of which you've already summarized here tonight. But if you start thinking about it, so I'd be very interested in reading, I'll call it a rebuttal, for lack of a better word, of why this won't work. You keep on using those words, why it's not a good idea. You have anecdotally given us several, but I'd like you to have as thorough as possible document urging us not to go forward with this.
Absolutely.
2, I'd like not only the Board of Selectmen in Hamilton to have but I would also encourage, if we're not violating something, an intergovernmental thing, to have the chief in Hamilton, Chief Stevens, through Michael, well, we can't step on Michael Lombardo's toes, but it'd be very interesting to hear what the leadership of the fire department in Hamilton thinks about this as well, if they can be allowed to actually put it in writing so we can see it as well. And lastly, I'd like to see that as I suggested earlier, the Hamilton Board of Selectmen debate this as well. And I recommend we don't take any action on it tonight.
Yeah, I would.
There was no action recommended tonight. I mean, right, that wasn't on the agenda. There's no motion in the packet. That was not the
Right.
intention of, it was just to have the initial discussion about it.
What do you think,
I agree.
John? Thanks.
Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you much.
Okay. You guys can go now. No, we
No.
can't go.
Not yet.
Okay, maybe we're shooting for one here. Let's see, scope. Update,
Oh, the
no.
RECC.
Regional dispatch.
yeah, RECC, right.
I crossed that off like we'd already done it. It was a little Freudian on my part.
Go ahead, Peter.
Okay. There have been at least one article in Salem News, I think 2 in the past few weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks. Yep, there have been 2. Since we held a board meeting on January 16th. And at that point, officials from State 911 were present, and I think generally coming out of that discussion, it is relatively safe to assume that at some point in the future, hard to say exactly when, State 911 will take over management of the rec center. They plan to take over State Police Dispatch in the next several months. They've obviously put in many millions of dollars into the RACC. Sheriff Coppinger, while he certainly supports the work done at the dispatch center, I think has a lot on his plate, and this might not necessarily align with his mission. And so I would expect that the Sheriff's Department will probably just transition to more of a landlord role. So State 911 has been responsible for disbursement of over $300 million in grant funds to encourage regionalization of dispatch, but they haven't ever actually run dispatch operations before. So there's honestly, I think, a lot of uncertainty about the ability of State 911 and their new management team, who they're in the process of hiring, to take over the rec operations. So as part of this conversation, there's clearly a lot of uncertainty over the management and oversight of the program up there, and I know at this meeting on the 16th, I expressed that whatever form it takes, it's important that the towns continue to have a seat at the table in, and give input. Obviously, the chiefs on the operational side, and hopefully that would be the case. All the other administrators, said the same thing. That being said, when you look at the call volume, there are right now 900 plus calls a day fielded at the rec. Overwhelming majority of which are not from the 5-member communities. They're from the cell calls, and they've merged the 2 rooms at this point. So we're really looking in terms of emergency calls. There are about 20 or 25 from the 5 towns in Amesbury. Is planning on exiting next year. So I'm a little concerned about how much of a voice we're going to have once State 911 takes it over. So on the operational side, something that certainly matters to the firefighters and to the chiefs is, like I said, they combined radio rooms, but I would expect once State 911 takes it over that they will look to make it a truly regional center. One of the main ways that you do that is get rid of separate frequencies. Right now, every fire and police department from each of the 5 communities are operating on their own frequency, though. So that's 10 channels that the dispatchers have to monitor. So they'll probably cut that down to 1 or 2 for all of the fire and police departments going forward. So that's something that other area chiefs have expressed concern about. We obviously were on shared frequency with Hamilton for a long time, so we're in a little different position there, but that's something that we can expect. So talking about the current FY18 budget, as Sheriff Coppinger has come in and he's made some changes in terms of the administrative staffing. Really, his marching orders have been to reduce the subsidy that he provides to the rec on an annual basis as much as possible. So over the past few months, that number, well, I should say past year really, since he came into office, that number has gone down from 2.3 million down to 300,000. Now, it's a little bit misleading because there are a fair amount of one-time revenues that were applied to get that number down as much as it has. But the cuts that have been made really have not impacted dispatcher staffing or service levels. So it's getting to a more sustainable model, which was always our goal and a concern about potential rate increases down the line. So because of the uncertainty about what the sheriff will contribute going forward and what role State 911 will have, and because of where we are in our budget process, I made pretty clear that the 1626 per capita rate, which we've had all the way through, which is 82,000 off the cherry sheet, was something that we needed to have certainty on for FY19 because we've got no levy capacity. We don't have the ability to accommodate any increases. So my understanding is we're meeting in a few weeks, and we're going to be talking about the FY18 budget at that meeting. And my understanding is that we are going to be held whole at that number for next year. That's the recommendation of the sheriff, and I think between the sheriff's subsidy and State 911, we can expect to at least keep at that same number for next year, which is obviously important. So Amesbury, as I mentioned, at this meeting on the 16th, expressed the fact that they plan to leave regardless of what happens with State 911. So annual cherry sheet revenues, there's a little under $700,000 that are taken in from the 5 communities. Amesbury's contribution is just under 300,000 of that, so almost half of the cherry sheet revenue. So looking to FY20, there's going to be somewhere on the order of about $1 million gap between what's funded by State 911 and by the member communities and what the budget is probably going to look like. So I would expect to see, you know, obviously we've kept it that same number the whole way through, and we can't expect that forever. But given all of those changes, I'm pretty certain that our contribution would increase. It's just a matter of how much it would. Obviously, if State 911 is taking it over, they're now managing operations and have provided significant funds over the years. They obviously don't want to see it fail. So I wouldn't expect our rates to increase by that much, but it's a pretty big unknown at this point. So something that was, I think, mentioned in the articles, at least one of them, was the fact that there's an audit that's being conducted right now looking at operations management and finances across the board. It's something that's in the IMA. It's the first time it's happened since the formation of the REC, and I'd expect the findings of that.
Have those results?
It's a 400-page document, and so it's in draft form now. I haven't.
Still just in draft.
I haven't
when we had that meeting,
seen it yet. Correct. So that's basically. I'm hoping that we're going to have it at our meeting in a couple weeks, certainly by the end of February. But I would expect the findings are going to justify State 911 taking on a larger role. And I'm hopeful that whoever has oversight going forward is going to take a lot of the recommended fixes to heart. You know, obviously they looked for the feedback from the chiefs, from the managers. We had multiple interviews with our MRI, who's conducting this audit, and so they certainly heard about, you know, our concerns from a sustainability perspective and operational issues and things of that sort. So I think the good news that I can report.
I haven't heard it yet. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
He's about to
it's
say.
coming. Is that, you know, there was reference to when we left Hamilton Dispatch, and I know there was a lot of back and forth at the time about ownership of the infrastructure, the radio infrastructure.
Yeah, we lost.
And based on the discussions I've had, recent discussions, it looks like that the town will own all of our radio infrastructure, and we will have, the board will have an agreement that clarifies that before you, hopefully in the next month or two, so that if
You're talking
we were
at the rec center.
No, this is our equipment in town here.
Oh.
All of our radio equipment.
All of our radio. I get
Yep.
you. Okay.
Which was funded, you know, through development grant funding from State 911 when we went to the REC, because we went there with nothing. We were the only community who had no infrastructure going in the door.
Oh, I misunderstood. Okay.
So at this point, you know, given all the uncertainty, obviously Danvers has reached out, and we've discussed this now, I think, since maybe last spring or early summer. There was a feasibility study that was done for Danvers to host both Hamilton and Manchester. There's copies in the binder. One of the reasons it's so thick, it's 100+ pages. Basically, high-level executive summary of that report was that Danvers could, in their new facility, take on both Hamilton and Manchester, and the three communities combined would see over $500,000 in savings. Hamilton and Manchester's rates to provide the service would essentially be cut in half. So neither of those communities has moved forward to date, but there is also both capacity in Danvers, even if Hamilton and Manchester join, for us to join, and interest in Danvers in working just with Wenham, even if Hamilton and Manchester don't ultimately express interest and move forward.
Well, so we're going to get this 400-page report on a diet to 300 pages, whatever. But, you know, that whatever the report says, that we
We'll
still
put
have,
it in the binder, don't worry.
whatever the report says, it looks like the option of having the state take over, which might be preferable to the existing arrangement, still might not be satisfactory, at least financially. So I think we need a plan B. Again, we want to have both the police and the fire department assisting us in evaluating. We have to do an evaluation. We just can't say, oh, my God almighty, we got 2 months to do something. So one would be obviously going with Danvers. And I think the other, even though that it didn't work the last time, it might work this time, is to resurrect at least the feasibility of having a Hamilton and Wenham regional center like we had before. And that I think we'd have to go through that exercise, and whether or not there are political reasons, financial reasons, or whatever reasons, that we should at least look at that as an option. And that I think we owe it to. We have so many other joint programs with Hamilton. We owe it. I understand there were governance and leadership issues at the time, which stuck in the craw of both the police and the firemen. And that, but nevertheless, that was then. This is now. And there might be a third option out there. I don't know what it would be, but I think we should start at least the process of trying to figure out, if we had to exit this state 911, what are our real options? John, Catherine?
Well, I attended the meeting with Peter as well. Most of our police and fire management were there. I guess you guys usually go to all these meetings. Peter portrayed a pretty accurate way of the meeting. My feeling is, in a general sense, to sit still and watch what's going on. I think there's going to be a lot of interplays. I cannot see how the state will step away from this. It just doesn't make sense.
It might not, but it might be unaffordable as well.
Right. I mean, I think the issue is that any transition, I mean, how quickly did we do it the first time transitioning from Hamilton to the rec? How long did it take?
A year and a half.
Right, and that was incredibly accelerated and
Yes.
honestly rushed at the end because we were up against a grant deadline, or the funding was going to go away.
Well,
So
I'm not saying don't do anything, but don't attempt to make a move until we figure out what the state is going to be doing.
I don't think it's a matter of attempting to make a move. I think it's understanding what our options are. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it's going to
Well,
take
I agree.
a minimum of a year and a half
Mm-hmm.
to actually make the transition, and just commissioning the feasibility study is going to take several months.
I think we need to know what our options are.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
I don't think we
Maybe
should-
I didn't put it the right way. But the state is not going to walk away from this. They already made it clear as to what the penalties can be if you go against what 911, and this is the state director that was saying this.
Yeah, I think one important detail that came out of the conversation was that they, unless there was a major egregious issue, they were not planning to withdraw support and incentive funding from, right, that no, they don't, I mean, my read of their comment was they didn't think they had the statutory authority to do that. So they really could just incentivize, as they've done over the past 10 years, communities to move to
New
regional
communities.
dispatch, but not penalize those
They
who
hold the
don't.
purse strings, is what they do.
Right.
They collect all that 911 money, and then they decide where it goes.
Right.
And I think that's a very strong incentive, as Peter's, I think, putting it, to stay on top of it.
Why did Hamilton choose not to go with Danvers?
Well, I didn't watch the meetings, but my understanding is that there was about $160,000 in potential savings, projected savings, by going to Danvers. But that I think Their police chief didn't support it when it went to the Board of Selectmen, and the particular issue or concern that I heard was having a dark station. That's something that we have had, we haven't known anything other than that. But for communities that are used to having somebody at the station 24/7, making that change is hard. I know in Amesbury, for instance, even though they opted into the rec, they still had greeters at their station after hours to avoid that dark station. And so I think ultimately that's where it ended up in Hamilton right now. I believe that they were gonna have further discussions as part of the budget process this year, but I haven't gotten an update.
I think to that point, this is what has been the hindrance of the growth and full development of the rec center. It's been the local political issues and people who can't get out of their own way. We don't have that here in Wenham. Our fire and police go along with whatever's going to serve the community and their jobs the best. You can't find that kind of cooperation. That's why Beverly's not there. They bailed completely on a contract they signed. Why? Because they folded to union pressure.
So can I weigh in on this a little?
Oh, yeah, please.
But
I'm
if
done.
you
I'm done.
are not done. So I feel, based on the current situation, which from the way you described it has a lot of unknowns that seem to me to be tending towards the negative. You know, this whole affordability thing came with the sheriff's support and the sheriff's budget, which seems to be being drawn away. We're talking about potentially being overseen, run by the state, where we're such a tiny cog in that wheel that I feel like your request to have a seat at the table is great, and you might even get that nominally, but in reality.
Children's table, of course.
Yeah, the children's table.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's important to add that the IMA, which is the governance structure that we're working under now, essentially ceases to exist once Amesbury withdraws, because it says it's only good as long as there are 5 communities. We'll be down to 4 next July. And so the advisory board structure and the input that we have now, we're starting from scratch.
Could go away. And then you sort of add to that the audit, which we haven't seen yet, but which seems as if it will indicate that there are some problems there which may or may not be able to be resolved, and $1 million gap. I guess my bottom line here is I would encourage us to quickly not change, but make sure we understand
That's my big concern.
options. Because I think we need to be ready in a year to make a move if all of these things play out the way they're sounding, and not be surprised by that.
Well, under the IMA, we had to give 2 years' notice. Where the IMA doesn't exist anymore, we don't have to give notice. So we can continue to look at the feasibility without triggering any, fact that
But
we're going to be exiting.
But we may want to be ready.
Yeah.
I guess that's my point, not that we would have a, and I hear what you're saying about looking at Danvers and Hamilton, and I think that's probably true, but considering past history maybe and affordability issues, I think I would put an emphasis on Danvers, on a feasibility with Danvers. Maybe a little higher priority. I don't want to call it a higher priority. I think that's the place where we're likeliest to be the most.
We won't know that until we study it, though.
Well, we won't.
Everything
We
they have is brand new.
I'm just
Right.
saying.
Well, it's,
No, but-
Danvers is brand new.
It's-
Hamilton's was brand new 8 years ago when
Right,
we left.
it's,
Right.
yeah. So anyway, I would just, yeah.
Seems to be
let's-
a preferable option. I just don't think we should discard not even studying the Hamilton.
Not discard, if we don't have enough bandwidth to do 2 at once, or money to pay someone else to do 2 at once, I would do Danvers first and then Hamilton. I guess
But
that's
you're at the same time.
that's the only way, that's.
Danvers
my-
should know that we have another option. Hamilton knows you have another option. So if you have only one option, you're studying one, I think you should study both at the same time and compare the results to the end.
To that point though, Jack, I think I'd go back to the fire truck discussion.
You can use that money.
No, I'm talking about the money. I would feel more comfortable with what you said if Hamilton, if this discussion were held in Hamilton and they said, oh, yeah, we would love to go back with Wenham and blah, 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 blah. So we would be, you know, before we know Danvers is interested.
Well,
we've heard some overtures.
All we
from
have to do is
Hamilton.
ask.
Well, and that, I think, would be a prerequisite to spending too much time
I've
understanding.
heard from their, at least one of the senior selectmen's been around. They would love to re-engage in that, and actually two selectmen, the current chairman and the previous chairman, and that. But that's just what.
Yeah, so we'd have
they're
to
not the town manager. They're not to represent all five of them, but at least two of the members of the current board of selectmen were enthusiastic about at least having a dialogue about that in the study. And I think, you know, with all the other joint programs they have, even though I understand there was lots of problems with the other one, mostly governance and that, because I would ask, when I was the interim TA, I would ask both the police chief, that's you, and the fire chief, and that, how does this rec operation compare with when we were in Hamilton? Well, I got equivocating answers by saying, well, some things are better, some things aren't. And so that, and I never got from Bob Blanchard or from Chief Perkins that, oh, this is so much better or it's so much worse. It's just, you know, some things are better, some things aren't. And that, but one thing certainly wasn't that the Hamilton at the time was pretty heavy-handed in terms of, I'll call it the governance structure, and that really, it wasn't a joint program, it was Hamilton's Emergency Center, which they serviced to Wenham. And that, we wouldn't want that. But we can ask, you know, not the Board of Selectmen, but obviously Michael Lombardo, are you interested or not? You know, and that if he says no, and or if yes, but here are the following conditions and they're unacceptable, we just move on.
So, it sounds like the plan is to work up a scope of work for a feasibility study that would include both towns, and to get some affirmation from the leadership in both towns, both town managers, that they are indeed interested
Yes.
in
Yes.
taking us on and,
Yes.
and working with us through a feasibility study,
Yes.
right? Because, I mean,
If-
ultimately, we need to know that they are,
Yeah, we need to go from the get-go.
Right, exactly.
Exactly. We're not going to waste our time here.
Right.
And that,
But post haste. I don't think there's any reason to wait.
I think it's not only the town manager, what's different than here, but it's also the Board of Selectmen, and also the police and the fire department, who are basically, you know, that, because that was some of the problem wasn't the Board of Selectmen or the town manager in the past. It was basically the police chief, the fire chief, and that, mostly, whatever. And the police chief's wife, who ran it. So I think there needs to be some welcoming by all three parties that they would be interested in studying whether or not it can be reconstituted. And that absent that, you know, we don't do it.
Okay. And you'll keep us informed of anything that may change, and also I would read, well, I don't think I'd read 400 pages, but I'm really interested in the executive summary on the audit that you're.
I'll certainly distribute
Yeah,
the
that'll
audit
be-
as
that'll be
soon as we have it.
Okay.
Of course, no matter what it says, I think that it's not going to alleviate the problems that Pete was describing. Coming down the road doesn't look very good.
No, and it just, what I'm thinking is that there could be problems that are bigger to overcome than we've even heard. And
Maybe.
that's what I'm interested to know.
Maybe,
Or things in place that are gonna reduce the problems, I don't know,
but not, okay.
right?
Mr. Chairman, it's getting late.
Yeah, we're out of time, too. So we promised to end this at, any comments, by the way, from what we talked about? Anyone want to opine, want to say?
Definitely need a plan B.
Yep. Okay, so I'm not going to recommend that, can we get away with not doing D and E and F?
Well,
G and H and I, J, K, and all.
Yeah,
So-
I've got 8 or 9 minutes to go through too, so.
We're going to kill that too, John.
So E is something that I mentioned before the meeting, is something that will be on the February 20th agenda. And both D and F have budget implications for FY19. And so I'd ask that we take those up and try to get through them relatively quickly.
I don't think that will get quick.
I don't think F can we get through quickly. I don't know how you do that, but a D, I guess so. Thank you, guys, for your
Thank you.
input.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. We listened.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well,
I am concerned about the amount of time we have between now and the time the warrant closes.
yeah, so let's have another meeting. How about next Tuesday night?
Well, now I have my calendar, so if we think these things are necessary and folks don't want to do them tonight, let's figure out when we're going to have another meeting.
Pick one.
So Finance Committee, because the board wasn't scheduled to meet, has scheduled their meeting for next Tuesday night.
Okay, I'm available Wednesday, I'm available Thursday, I'm available in the mornings.
Not Wednesday. Thursday ZBA is meeting.
You're not a member.
Nope. They typically use this room,
They do, but
so,
We don't have to have, I mean, we typically have it at 6:30 and it's televised, but we can also have, one that's not televised or televised at 9 o'clock in the morning, at 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
I'm flexible.
I'm too.
just on these two items?
No, these 2, 3, and add 1 or 2. I don't know. I mean, that if there's something you didn't put on the agenda because of time constraints, put it on. I don't know what that would be.
Do you want to meet a little earlier on Tuesday evening?
Yeah.
See if the Finance Committee would meet at 7 and have our meeting at 5:30 or 6.
I think we better make it at 5. I mean, that one of these. I'd like to make sure we had at least an hour and 15 minutes to cover these 3.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to, okay, it's Finance Committee's coming in, it's 10 minutes to 7.
Yep.
We got to stop. I'd rather begin a little early and with some breathing room. What do you think about that?
so next Tuesday, February 13th at 5. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah. John?
Okay.
Great.
And then I think I heard Peter say that he thinks that there would be some usefulness to having a joint meeting with the FinCom to talk about any financial articles on the 21st.
And
Did I hear that?
give recommendations and a little more information. Obviously, we'll have the language. We'll continue to work on those warrant articles since nothing got dinged tonight. And we'll have the details on
Guess
those.
we get the date Tuesday.
Tuesday is the 13th.
I'd like to see the Finance Committee go through the articles and come up with yay and nay, and then,
So last year, what we did was a joint session with the Selectmen and the Finance Committee on all the finance-related articles and go through them one by one and get a recommendation from both. So that way, if there are
we've already done that.
questions,
We've done that for the Board of Selectmen already.
there's no recommendations
No,
on any of the
we've
articles.
just agreed to put them on
They're
warrant
just agreed
pending.
to- right.
Yeah. Because then is it another meeting, an additional meeting where we talk about with the planning board, where we talk about all of the articles that they have to have hearings on and make recommendations on?
I think it would probably be, I don't know that it would be a joint meeting. That's not something we've done historically on the zoning bylaw.
But would it be an addition, could it fit into the 20th
It
or
could-
the 6th?
It would be on the 6th. The
So-
6th would be for all zoning bylaw articles.
So the first time we would see those in their final form with the recommendations from the planning board is the night that we have to close the warrant. Sorry, that sounds severe, but I think that's what it is.
I mean, they obviously, you'd have them more, at least, it would be at least more than a week in advance of that meeting. You would have the proposed versions of the bylaws. I mean, we actually included the draft versions in the packets for tonight.
So you think we'll be able to meet on the 13th, the 20th, the 21st, and the 6th, and finish everything? Is that what we're saying?
And we could always add another meeting the week of the 26th, so on the 27th.
I remember in the day we had Saturday meetings, Saturday mornings, right near the end, Catherine is saying yes, and Harriet's saying yes. Aren't you, Harriet? There you go.
Okay.
You don't forget those.
So I have no problem with extra meetings. I am possibly not available the 26th, 27th, and 28th. So if we That's my only, that's why I was.
What days of the week is that?
It's a
by the way?
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday
Well,
of the last week, which we don't presently, it's not a regular.
I'm available Thursday. I wouldn't like to do it on Friday, but, you know, when that,
We should retain these books as they are. for
Well,
now.
we get into Holy Week then.
oh, that's not good.
Yeah, so Thursday,
So we
Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
No, I'm not gonna do it Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
No.
No.
So I guess we'll see where we are after next week.
Yeah, and we could potentially revisit the non-financial and non-zoning bylaw warrant articles at our meeting next week and give recommendations on those.
So how many articles do we have that you call finance-related,
How many of them are finance related?
approximately?
I'll say 2/3 without looking at the list.
Yeah, I don't want to go through this all over again, you know, I mean, that,
Well, we do have to go through it all over again to a certain extent,
Yeah.
once we see the final wording and to vote on whether or not we recommend favorable action.
yes, we do. But, you know, it would be, if we only did it amongst ourselves, it would be truncated because we've already discussed it. And when we add, you know, 5 more people in the mix, you know, and then we have 15 articles, we're going to be here for 3 hours.
So if we have.
I'd like to see them, with Peter's assistance, go through the finance articles and see if they agree with, you already have a preliminary understanding where they stand. Do they have a problem with any of these? Whether it's free cash application, this, that, and the other thing, and that, and then, you know, talk about any potential difficulties or differences they have with us in terms of not being able to recommend it favorably. And then, you know, that's, I don't need to hear again all of these application of cash, you know, we've already done that. And that,
I guess the only.
here we are, almost 3 hours into this meeting, you know, and that could be a two, anyway.
I guess the only thing that would be, I feel would be important to have a joint, definitely to have a joint meeting is if through this process, whether we do it separately or together, we don't agree.
Yes.
If the FinCom says yay and we say nay, we ought to get together and talk about it before town meeting.
Yes, totally agree, which is what we've done every year since I was a little boy around here. And well, at the end, there's usually something that, you know, and that they're not quite in agreement on, and that dialogue at the very end, usually we're on the same page. And that, but they have 3 members of the group that are new. This is the first time going through it, and, you know, I'm sure they're going to be a lot more questions than if they had been on the committee for 4. One of the problems we have with the Finance Committee is that, you remember back in the day, people would stick around for 6 years. And the people who had, you know, there was a lot of, so they understood it. They didn't have to go through the same damn thing all the time. So now we have 3 people who are very new and want to ask questions, and a couple of members particularly, and that I can just see a very long meeting. I like them, let them talk amongst themselves with Peter's assistance.
And Leslie's.
Huh?
And Leslie's.
And Leslie's.
So if,
Never mind Peter, just Leslie.
Sounds good to me.
so, yeah, you will get no complaint from
Sign
Peter
me
on
up.
that.
Well, I'm just trying to say that
So-
let them talk amongst themselves, and if they have 1 or 2 issues, some of them might just be understanding what it means, and either Leslie or Peter can clarify. And if they really have a substantive difference, we can talk. We should get together and talk about one, in order to see if we can come up with a unified position.
So if,
Then, if necessary, we bring in the sage advice.
Yeah.
so by when, if we wanted to have our recommendations or our positions printed in our warrant book, by when do we have to make those decisions?
So, what, I'm sorry.
So
Good question.
favorable, not favorable, it's in the, we, ideally, it would be printed in the warrant book, each body's position. But what's the date by which we would have to have those positions in order to be able to have them actually printed in the warrant book?
Jackie, is it March 8th?
What?
The deadline to have recommendations in the warrant book before it goes to print?
No, it's the 7th, I think.
That's a Wednesday.
So your meeting on March 6th is really the last time the board.
I will say in the original schedule that I drafted, I put in the last meeting date in February as the, please, let's close the warrant this day, and March 6th is the absolute last day as a part of a regularly scheduled meeting. In terms of and for me, in terms of the printing turnaround for the warrant books as well.
And there's, if I am right, that's gonna be very close to the day that we need to have ballot questions written.
It's all,
That they're
right, exactly.
put in there.
Yep.
Okay, so if we have, so the FinCom has to make their position, we have to have our positions way before that, well, sometime before that. So if there are discrepancies, we can meet before the 8th.
So I think,
Yeah.
based on this discussion, the FinCom is planning to meet next Tuesday night. We can see, no, it's next Tuesday night. No, it's not posted yet. It's a week away.
Yeah,
That's on the
but their
schedule.
plan.
That's the plan. We'll try to get as many of the finance-related articles on that agenda and get their recommendations at that time. Any spillover, we might have to split it up in half, because we've got other items already planned for the agenda for that night. So we might try to do something on the 15th, like next Thursday night, so
Well,
that when you meet on the 20th,
let me see. So, point of order. We can close the warrant then. That doesn't mean we can't open the warrant in a subsequent meeting and vote on it and then close at the end of the meeting.
correct.
Yes, but
By
what
the
I'm
way-
saying is by March 6th, if we want to go to town meeting with our positions and the FinCom's positions printed in the warrant book, they have to be
You could
voted
print
on.
an addenda, we've done that before.
It's kind of messy, but when do we have to send it to the printer?
That's what,
March 7th.
Oh,
was kind of my question.
7th or the 8th is when we need to be tinkering
All
with
right.
the formatting so that they can turn
Be
it
done.
around for the Boy
So-
Scouts to deliver.
I'm going to redact my comment about not being available the last week of February, because I think it's very possible we're going to need a meeting in the last week of February, the beginning of the last week
yeah, maybe.
of February. So, wow, that's March, yeah. Okay,
So right now, we're
Yeah.
just planning on meeting next Tuesday, the 13th at 5, and the following Tuesday, which would be regularly scheduled meeting at 6:30, the Tuesday, the 20th. And then
Next 2 Tuesdays.
the next 2 Tuesdays, and then if we need
Tomorrow
other
night.
meetings in addition to tomorrow night.
Yeah, in the past, Catherine and John both are familiar with that, just before the warrant is being published, you have 2 or 3 meetings within the scope of a week. That's common.
okay. I got it. Are we doing minutes tonight, or are we going to save that?
No, we're
for
going to save
next?
that. I move we adjourn. John,
Second.
further discussion, all in favor, aye. 9:30, 3 hours, okay.